So Ustad Abdullah Al-Andalusi is an international speaker, thinker, and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. He's an instructor and head of the Department of Occidentology at the Quran Institute and co-founder of the discussion forum, the Muslim Debate Initiative. Ustad Abdullah has delivered talks internationally on the question of the purpose of life, the existence of God, the miracle of the Quran, the superiority of the Sharia as a social and political system, and Islamic economy. Furthermore, Ustad Abdullah has given extensive talks and written articles rationally critiquing secularism, liberalism, secular democracy, and materialism. He has spoken in community centers, universities, colleges, and programs on TV and radio channels, including the BBC, ITV, Al Jazeera, Press TV, Islam Channel, and Iqra TV. He also has engaged in a number of debates with atheists, secularists, agnostics, liberals, and Christians on a variety of topics from theology to political philosophy. Without further ado, please welcome Ustad Abdullah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salam Nabi Kareem Muhammad wa alihi tayyibin wa sahbihi salihin. I greet you with Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, on this day, World Turban and Jalabiya Day, right? Yeah? Or did I miss here? Okay, anyway, I'll just go with Turban Jalabiya Day today. So we're discussing a very interesting topic, feminism and gender theory. I'd like to apologize for my lateness. My meeting with the patriarchy was a bit longer than I anticipated. They told me that I have to fulfill quotas of getting more women to make more sandwiches and coffees and more application forms for Husserl's University as well. So that's probably what some people might think a man would come and say in a lecture on feminism and gender theory. However, in correction of perhaps a first misunderstanding that people might think, which is, what's a man doing speaking about feminism? Of course, tomorrow will be what's a white man or a white passing man doing speaking about critical race theory and so on and so forth. And if I was to talk about queer theory, what's a heterosexual man talking about queer theory? Well, I'd like to think that ideas are things you can discuss, otherwise the words have no meanings, right? The point about words is you can discuss topics that you don't necessarily, you can discuss data that you don't necessarily experience. Most of you who study engineering and physics and what have you haven't done the experiments that determined the things that you believe in to be the case, but you believe it because it's in textbooks, and you can understand it because language is about describing things that you don't necessarily personally involve yourself in. That's why people read fiction books about stories about Sinbad and about Ahab and Moby Dick and the White Whale, because you don't have to go on the ship to experience it, you read it in the book, hence the point of language, I suppose. However, we won't be, contrary to popular belief, you don't have to experience life as a woman or as a person of color or as a person, or even as a Muslim to talk about being a Muslim, being a person of color, or being, about the facts related to the philosopher's ideas about these topics. You can discuss philosophy, right, about different topics, right? People come up with ideas. You don't have to be a conservative to talk about conservatism. You don't have to be a liberal to talk about liberalism. You don't have to be a Marxist to talk about Marxism and so on and so forth. However, if this topic was today, what's life like as a woman in 21st century Vancouver, I wouldn't be very qualified to talk about that because I have no experience as a woman. Unless I choose to identify as one, then maybe I can, right? So, okay. So in today's kind of schools of thought, we'll be talking about feminism. And feminism is, oh, wait a second. Where is feminism? Which one of these is feminism? Would anyone like to answer that? Which one of these ideologies is feminism? Anyone?
All of them?
Yes, you're right, all of them. Because basically, Feminism, if you want to give a more simpler answer, is just, when these were being concocted, most of these ideas, feminism is just a concept of these ideas for women too. Right? That's it. Let women join in. Although technically Marxism started out as being for men and women, but then again, Karl Marx mostly spoke about the perspective of the working man. And although he envisioned, of course, that women would be equal to men once you abolish all classes and all dependence, but we'll get into that. So, we're going to ask a very important question. This question is going to go out to the audience. So all of you, I'm going to adopt the persona. I'm going to play devil's advocate against you guys. So you'll be you guys versus me on this question, right? You ready for it? If you can handle it? Okay. Is it anti-Semitic to criticize Zionism? I thought we would start off with a nice light question for you guys. Right? Is it anti-Semitic? Who would like to go ahead and and argue, well, whichever way you want to argue, but is it anti-Semitic to criticize Zionism?
But it's not.
Sorry?
But it's not.
Why isn't it not, sister?
There's a huge difference between anti-Semitism.
Sorry?
There's a huge difference between anti-Semitism and Zionism. Anti-Semitism is basically about, it's about criticizing the Jews for their beliefs as Jews.
Yeah.
Zionism is a political philosophy of which has more to do with occupation of a particular land and based on historically incorrect facts, not facts like historical inaccuracies and all. So that's there's a huge difference.
Okay, so this says they're very different because one is a criticism of Jews and what they believe, another one is a criticism of occupation. But Zionism isn't the same as occupation because Zionism is just an idea, right? The state of Israel is an occupation. Zionism is a belief, and it's a belief held by Jews. So you initially said that anti-Semitism is criticizing Jews and what they believe, and if Jews believe in Zionism, then isn't that then anti-Semitism because you're criticizing what Jews believe? And because Zionism is a belief about Jews as well, about Jewish rights. So then, if you're criticizing Zionism, how are you not criticizing Jewish rights then? And of course, if you are criticizing Jewish rights, how are you not anti-Semitic? Who wants to go? You, brother there, with the dark blue top.
I have a question, actually.
You have a question? You're going to be answering the question. You can't answer a question with a question.
To clarify your question, I have a question.
Okay, but please let all the question be, what do you mean is? What do you mean it? What do you mean anti-Semitic? What do you mean criticize? It's a bit of an in-joke for those who like Jordan Peterson. Anyway, go ahead. What's your question?
Is Zionism exclusive to Jews?
Is Zionism exclusive to Jews? Zionism doesn't say it excludes Jews, it just simply is a belief about Jewish rights. And remember, I'm playing devil's advocate here, so I have to adopt the persona to get you guys, your brains thinking. Okay, so gentleman in the back, you? Zakala.
They might be a minority of Jews, but there are Jews that also criticize Zionism as well. So if you want to call those population of Jews anti-Semitic as well, then you've got to argue your way out of that.
Okay, so the gentleman says, there's a minority of Jews that criticize anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, or they are anti-Zionist, sorry. So am I saying, would they be anti-Semitic because they criticize Zionism? To which I could simply turn it around and say, don't you have, like many African Americans who support Trump, right? Kanye, and like some people in the African American community, which I've seen online, have accused him of being self-hating in his characteristic of being a person of color. So could it not be then, using that same logic, you could simply say that those Jews were anti-Semitic, they could be self-hating according to, and Zionists do call them that. So yeah. So again, is it anti-Semitic to criticize Zionism? I'll go down to the middle now. Anyone in the middle? Would you like to stick your neck out into the gauntlet? You, brother.
It depends on where you are in a social setting. So,
yeah.
But
It depends where you are in a social setting.
yes, if you are
Okay, so if you sit down and you have a good view or something, you can...
faculty
the mountain.
Where there is, say, no Israel lobby, so then you will not be classified as an anti-Semite for criticizing.
So if you're in a what, sorry?
So if you're an organization, in this case,
If you're in an organization, yeah?
yeah, where criticizing Zionism isn't considered anti-Semitic, then you're not anti-Semitic. But in an organization, say a U.S. member of parliament, if they
So if you're in an organization that doesn't consider it to be anti-Semitic, it's fine. But if you're in an organization that does consider it to be anti-Semitic, it's not fine. Isn't that relativist? Like, what depends what the organization you're in feels like? You seem to answer the question then. That just means that it can be, depending on whether the people around you agree with you or something. Do you think that answers it? Anyone on this side? Well, you already went. I want to give anyone else. No? No one else? You don't know how to deal with this? Come on, guys. Come over. Okay, you right on the far right, but not far right ideologically speaking, of course. Yes.
Anti-Semitism is like a criticism of being Jewish as a religion. Zionism is more
Anti-Semitism is a criticism of being Jewish as a religion. Okay, yeah.
Zionism is more like a nation setting. It's an idea that came after the Jewish religion came. It's like if I'm pro-Muslim, but some of the Islamic nations are being, for example, corrupt or doing really bad stuff, I can be against those nations
Yeah.
and still not be an Islamophobic.
Okay. So you're saying it's criticizing religion. So if someone criticizes Jews as a race, that's fine because that's not a religion. But it's only anti-Semitism if you criticize Jews as a religion. Do you not see perhaps what you're saying? So do you mean to include race as well, or just religion, criticizing Jewish religion?
Well, that's a whole discussion about like if being Jewish is a race, because it didn't start out.
Or an ethnicity.
Saying Zionism is an idea that many Jewish people, race or not, do not subscribe to.
But what you're describing, you said you can criticize a Muslim country that does bad things, right? So a Zionist would say, we have no problem with you criticizing policies of Israel as a government because, everyone criticizes, governments, and governments are never perfect. But if you criticize Zionism, the idea that Jews deserve rights as a nation state, as everyone deserves rights to a state, then you are anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say if you have to define what Zionism means, the way you're putting it, yes, it's totally fine. But the way people interpret and act it out, then that would be a problem.
Okay.
Zionism,
So you're saying the way I'm putting it totally fine. So then you would agree that with the way I'm putting it, it is anti-Semitic to criticize Zionism.
well, I have to research into it, but people are anti-Zionist based on what Zionism is causing, what effect it has. They don't like it has these effects, therefore they're anti that idea.
Well,
We're going in a loop, but
or are we? Because like they could say that, look, Zionism is just a belief that Jews deserve rights. Are you saying that Jews deserving rights causes injustice?
Jews deserving rights
Yeah.
do not mean like, for example, they have to kick a whole nation of Palestinians out.
Yeah, well, Zionists would say that they don't have to kick all Palestinians out either, but that Jews deserve the right to live in a nation state, like every other ethnicity. They'll say, don't Kurds feel they have a right to live in a nation state, Kurdish rights, yeah? So then why not Jews?
Well, if Zionism means yes, Jews deserve rights, then it is anti-Semitic and even more basically anti-human to say it's wrong.
Okay, great. So you agree with the question. That's not really a debate here, but yes. Anyone else? Come on, guys. Okay, now you're going to step up. Anyone from this side? Any takers? No? Is my turban scaring you? Sorry. Okay, then the gentleman in the checkered kind of shirt.
Yeah, I say that anti-Semitism could be described as anti-Jewish bigotry, and in that case, it's not necessarily related to Zionism, because Zionism is a belief, and criticizing a belief is not necessarily bigotry against a group of people, just a criticism of their identity.
So you're saying that, so if Zionism is the belief that Jews deserve rights, and you are criticizing the idea that Jews deserve rights, that's not bigotry?
Well, Zionism is not the belief that Jews have rights. It's
No, Jews deserve rights.
Well, they do, but it's much more than just that. It's also based on colonialism and taking land that does not belong to them initially.
Well, no, Jews will say, surely, firstly they'll say, well, no, they're not here to steal anyone's land. They're here to just take back the land that was theirs, and that everyone supports people going back to their home. So Jews just want to go back to their home, and they don't want to kick out anyone that happens to have been there since they left, although not all of them left, but anyway, long story. But they just want to live there in peace with security that Jews will never face pogroms or oppression ever again. And Zionism is simply the idea that to achieve that, they need a state that Jews control, simply to guarantee Jews don't be killed, are not killed, massacred, and persecuted, as they have been for centuries around the world.
Well, there are many other ways to guarantee that Jews don't get killed under other systems.
Or oppressed. Well, they say we tried that. In France, we thought it was a liberal country, and the Dreyfus affair proved that a loyal Jewish military commander just got framed for a crime he didn't commit because there was someone else leaking intelligence to the Germans, and they just said, "Oh, it must be the Jewish guy." So they said like we face persecution historically. It's been rather consistent throughout history. So we've tried and failed to live with Gentiles, and with the Gentiles being the ones who control the power over us, and we as the controlled class, we simply want to have power over our own destiny. What's wrong with that? Why can't Jews have a power over destiny to guarantee that we don't get persecuted? I'm saying speaking obviously, although technically I'm 0.4% Jewish, but anyway, genetic studies, long story. Anyway, but that's not what I'm arguing for. Anyway, but I'm just saying that so they could say that. Do you want Jews to be persecuted? No. Is that why you're opposing Zionism? No. Because it seems to me that Zionism is the way to guarantee Jews are not persecuted, and you're attacking that. So the only way that can be explained is that you want Jews to be persecuted.
I disagree with that premise in the first place, that Zionism is the only way for Jews to not be persecuted.
Well, we've tried every other way, so if it doesn't work, and now you want to take away the only way that has proven to work, where we control, like there's no Jewish pogroms in the state of Israel, so that's shown that works, whereas even in the United States of America you have racists parading down Jewish streets very famously to intimidate, harass, and Jews face anti-Semitism on a social level, even though they're not persecuted by the US government, but they still face racism on a social level. At least we have a land where we have a safe space, where we are not persecuted. So if you're against Jewish safe spaces, then surely that must mean you're against Jewish safety.
No, I disagree with that idea in the first place. I think that secular countries do a good job at mostly providing people or groups in societies safety.
Well, historically they really haven't. Just go to secular India and ask the Muslims there how wonderful the secularism is working out for them. Yeah?
Do not necessarily define secular principles, or do not necessarily go against secular principles. Because I think under better secular systems we get accommodating more people.
Yeah, but let me tell you this, right? So obviously we all agree that being openly anti-Semitic is not acceptable in society, okay? And of course, if someone wants to be anti-Semitic, they can't just criticize Jews as Jews anymore, because obviously they'll get exposed and arrested or what have you, or they'll lose sneaker deals. So then the only way they could ever target Jews, the only avenue left open to them, obviously, is to criticize Zionism, is it not? Because they can't criticize Jews as a race, they can't criticize Jews as a religion, so the only way open. So would you not agree then that someone who hates Jews but can't say openly would say arguments very similar to what you're saying to me right now?
Sure, but that does not necessarily legitimize the argument in the first place.
Well, I'm just simply saying that someone who is motivated hating Jews, would you agree would sound a lot like you're saying right now, that you're saying you don't hate Jews but you just want to criticize Zionism all of a sudden?
Yeah, well, but someone who hates Jews would probably agree that, I don't know, sugar tastes good, and I think that sugar tastes good too, so that does not necessarily make the fact that sugar tastes good a false statement.
I know, but they could simply say that there are many countries around the world that are occupations. No one says that they should be removed, like all the white people in North America should go, well, most people. Well, I don't know what's happening now, but no one says all go back home. No one makes a big fuss, but everyone makes a big fuss about Israel and Zionism, which was no different. Even if we concede, let's say that Jews are foreigners to the land of Palestine, which we can argue they're not, but let's just say they are. no one makes a big hullabaloo about the Canadian, white Canadians or whoever who's colonial this land, and now they're just considered even to be native, strangely, or just considered to be like just Canadians, right? Everyone else has to have a little adjective in front of them, or prefix. So no one makes a fuss about America, no one makes a fuss about China or any of these countries that do far worse things than the Israeli government, massacres, actual genocides. So why are you picking on Zionism then? Doesn't that seem? Couldn't that seem to any reasonable person that you have especially animus against Zionism, even though there are other countries which are worse, doing worse than Israel? So what other possible explanation could there be other than there might be a hidden animus in you towards Jews?
Well, because the difference between those countries and, say, Israel is that, at least in Canada, there is to some degree consideration and admission that Canadians have committed those.
And there are many Jewish Zionists who disagree with some of the Israeli government's policies, and they're still Zionist.
Well, there's no.
So your issue is only if you don't hate Jews, then surely it's only the Israeli government you don't like, not Zionism.
There's a constant state of apartheid in occupied Palestine now, but in Canada.
No, they'll say that's just a state of the undeclared state, or the declared state of Palestine. They accepted the Oslo Accords, to have their own autonomous areas. They have a Palestinian passport. They're just a state. It's not segregation. It's just a separate country with some complicated borders. But basically, it's a separate country, you could say easily. That the state of Palestine is declared and recognized to a limited degree by the UN, so they are a separate country. It's like saying that the Canadians keep the Americans segregated from you because by the border. Well, actually, it's a bad argument because you probably do. That's probably why you have the border. Okay, I'll pause it here because this is not talk, because people said, is this a talk about feminism or is this the wrong day? Let me check the schedule calendar. Okay, why do you think? Can anyone tell me why I entertained that question in the first place and why I argued in the manner I did against him, right? Sister?
Anything, it depends on how you are arguing. You can justify something as ridiculous, as absurd as, and I think you are trying to put something out for the conversation that we have to start about the arguments on parent design at times, how misplaced they can be, and the origins and the entire sort of history. So I think we are trying to bring our attention to that.
Yeah.
Also, I would just like to add one thing regarding the conversation that.
Well, it was just an example conversation. It's not really. It's not a serious argument, and I was trying to highlight a different point altogether, right? Maybe we have a debate with Zionists at UBC. Again, I'm available. You just sort out my French finish from Tim Hortons. I'm all yours. But like as I said, like the Zionist debate is not meant to be serious. Yeah, it's.
But in case somebody takes the wrong message, it's important to.
I'm about to redress that, but I'll redress it when I connect it to something else first. Yeah. Okay. So does anyone know why I brought out this random question? And no, it's not because I kind of forgot to write a presentation for the feminism thing, and I'm just trying to waste time. Okay, brother in the front there.
Criticizing feminism will make you a misogynist, anti-woman.
Ah, he gets it. Because if you just replace the word anti-Semitic with misogynist, and you place the word Zionist with feminist, you get the exact same arguments, exactly, made by Neo-Marxist feminists, or now the kind of the more vocal ones, I suppose, against anyone who criticizes feminism. You're not there because you believe it, you're not criticizing it because you believe in Revelation that talks about gender roles, that organizes a society based on principles, rules by the creator of the entire universe and the creator of human nature who knows better than us. No. You're doing it because you secretly hate women, you're part of a patriarchy, a group, an oppressor class defined by the attribute of being male, which is a social construct, and you wish to enjoy privilege against another social construct defined as, don't say women, male, female, men and women. And so you can't say you hate women openly because that would expose you, and so instead you have to simply say you're against feminism, but secretly that's just a hidden animus in you against women in general, and any chance women can have to have control over their own lives and determine their own autonomy. I made the exact same argument for Zionism and so on, and the Zionists make the exact same argument I just told you, right? And you could take out anti-Semitic, and then replace it with misogyny, and then you can replace it with anti-black. And you can take out Zionism and replace it with critical race theory, and you'd have the exact same argument. It'd work exactly the same, right? Oh, you're not, well, I don't want to give the game away tomorrow, but that's pretty much what it is, basically. You're not really criticizing critical race theory because you think it's a Neo-Marxist framework that doesn't understand the dynamics of emergent human biases and prejudices against each other for arbitrary reasons. Nope. You just criticize it because you want supremacy for whiteness or being white adjacent. So you're not actually a white European person, but you're kind of like, you could pass for white, or you're of a lighter shade than sub-Saharan African people. So that's what I wanted to highlight, basically. Now, the counter-argument you want to see, just in case people say, you know, okay, I'll just embrace, well, I don't know about feminism, whatever, but I'm a Zionist now after going to Abdullah's lecture. Okay, well, quite simply, no, Zionism isn't about just rights for Jews, because we all believe that everyone deserves rights. Right? No one thinks that no one should have rights. But Zionism isn't that. Right, and that's what you should have challenged a bit more. Zionism is the belief that in a particular geographical area of land, the ethno-linguistic group known as Jews have a privileged position to determine the laws, legislation, and the government of the land. Right? And that's what it is. Right, that's what it is. It is about, it's argued about privilege concerning geography, but because they would argue that every nation state believes that one particular ethnic group has privilege, and hence why is it a nation state in the first place? Because it's based on a nation, nation's an ethnic-linguistic group. So the only way to really respond to all of that is to take the Islamic position and say, we don't believe in nation states or nationalism. An ethno-linguistic group doesn't have a privileged right to determine the laws in a locality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the universe, has the only right to determine the laws and rights all over the entire universe that he created. That would be our Islamic response. So then, to a feminist, it would say, are you saying that men should determine the rights of women? Why not women determine the rights of women? We say we don't get involved with who determines the rights of women because, in terms of created beings, because we didn't make ourselves. We have no right, male, female, whatever, to determine our rights. It is the creator of the universe who made us to find our purpose, and he alone determines what we deserve and what we don't deserve, and the mutual obligations we have to each other. Okay, that is the Islamic angle, which I'll be coming today, and you could even leave now and say, that's it, I've got it. But I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the Western philosophies and how they came to all these conclusions, and how you can rebut it, at least from the Quran and Sunnah perspective anyway. So, as I always point out, there is the two political enlightenment schools of thought, empiricism or Anglo-Saxon philosophy, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, which led to, you might call, liberalism, classical liberalism and conservatism. The rationalism, Descartes, he wasn't a political philosopher, but he just believed that knowledge begins with the mind transcends the body, mind-body duality. Why? What's that got to do with Marxism? What's René Descartes got to do with Marxism? He obviously didn't intend it. He never intended that. But the empiricists thought that, yes, give men and women kind of like equal rights in law, but only because the law has to be, because you can't account for individual differences and so on and so forth, so you just treat everyone the same, but we won't expect much from women because our empirical data, i.e. just looking at our society currently, which doesn't have an education system for women, women don't seem to be as educated as men. So in our society that doesn't educate women, women aren't educated as men. Therefore, conclusion, women have a lesser intellect than men. which is stupid and ridiculous, right? Just because something is that is a way doesn't mean it was ought to be that way, and of course doesn't mean it was meant to be that way, and so on and so forth. So they called empiricists, but they're anything but, basically. They made assumptions. Liberalism was based on assumptions, unproven, non-scientific assumptions, and so on. So we see John Locke mentioning here about the husband and wife. Obviously, they said the man should have the final decision in any practical question, not because he's stronger, but also because he's abler, right? So implying that he has a better intellect, because that's what John Locke kind of, in a way, believed, that men. But just because someone has a lesser intellect doesn't mean they deserve lesser rights. More or less, although he kind of said that in the family unit the man should make decisions and so on and so forth. But politically speaking, you can't give a man that who's a genius more rights than a man who is not a genius or of less intellect. So if that's the case, then that would also apply between men and women if you assumed that men had a greater intellect than women, right? So that's why liberals just treat everyone equally, but don't expect much from women. Initially, the classical liberals, that's kind of roughly what they thought like. But the continental philosophers went a different direction. The mind transcends the body, they said. So if the mind transcends the body, then your body doesn't determine your mind, right? Your body doesn't determine what's in your mind. So then everyone's minds are equal, right? It doesn't matter what skin color you have. It doesn't matter what genitalia you have or what hormones you have, although they didn't know about hormones back then. Everyone is equal. And so we see as early as 1673, the kind of Cartesian philosopher, François Poulain de la Barre, argued that the mind has no sex. Okay, not Simone de Beauvoir, that was much later. He argued it first. It was, of course, the Cartesians or the continental philosophers, because they said, well, everyone's mind is equal. Now, that would start the continental philosophers more focusing on equality. Because, well, forget about the body. Everyone's minds are equal. What makes you human and special is your mind. Therefore, that's the source of your equality, right? Whereas for the empiricists, they treat humans like atoms, right? The individual is an atom, and the individual this atom controls itself, and so every atom owns itself and should be allowed to fly wherever it wants to fly, right? That was more the empiricist side of things. So that's what led to a divergence, and of course, on this side of things, on the continental side of things, it would lead to the ideas of socialism and then Marxism and so on and so forth. And of course, Neo-Marxism and even postmodernism, because they would be taking the mind route all the way to its logical conclusion. As I mentioned yesterday, Jacques Rousseau mentioned that the origin of injustice is inequality in property. Inequality of ownership is the origin of injustice. I mentioned this yesterday, just recapping so you are reminded for those that attended. Socialism arose in the late 18th century, going into the 19th century, with a number of uprisings. They had their own Arab Springs. They also failed in many cases, but you had worker uprisings and so on and so forth. The early socialists didn't know exactly what they were going to aim for, but they wanted a society where workers had better rights and so on and so forth. They weren't mistreated by the Industrial Revolution. But on this period, because you could vote or not vote depending on how much wealth you had. So in the United States of America and in England, if you were poor, you didn't vote, because they didn't trust the poor people. It's like, well, so what does a poor person know about voting for politics? Only if you have a certain amount of wealth, then you're invested in the economic system, you're invested in society enough, and you have some spare time enough to study politics or study what's going on to make an educated decision. So the workers never had a choice, never had the ability to vote, basically, and that was one of the first things that was argued for, that workers should have the right to vote. But during this time, the idea started to spread that, well, if we have liberalism, what about women? Liberalism for men, what about women? Don't they deserve, if we have an idea of universal rights, and the Quakers and others were arguing that African slaves in the Americas were human as much as anybody else was, and so they deserve the same rights as human beings, then it's like, yeah, but what about then women? Because women, there's many laws that women, women don't benefit from similar laws that men do. So if a woman marries a man, her property becomes her husband's. right? And that led to a number of issues where there had acrimonious divorces where women were left penniless and without property because the husband refused to divorce her because she couldn't initiate the divorce, and she couldn't have access to her own houses that she brought into the marriage, right? So it caused a lot of issues in UK. So what started was basically a kind of Me Too movement, but not in the way you might think, where women say rights for us too equal to that of men, because you don't have a reason why not. All right? There's no reason why not. You say that everyone's an individual. Well, women are individuals, if you're Anglo-Saxon philosophy, or in the continent. In the continent, we have, everyone that has a mind deserves rights, or the human mind. Well, we have human minds, so there was no, what counter-argument could you make? Just convention said otherwise. From the old Germanic and Roman laws that Europe followed, they had this discriminatory, or they had different laws or different regulations for men and women that couldn't be justified anymore. Like, why are they still there? So feminism started out as basically liberalism for women, right? Now, then when Marxists came on the scene, Marxism came on the scene, and arguably it was feminist from the get-go, but the reason why you have specific Marxist feminists, and they don't just say we're just Marxists, is because Marx didn't talk about women so much. But he did say very clearly that, as I mentioned yesterday, that he viewed the family was a microcosm of capitalist oppression. You have the bourgeois, the ruling class, i.e. the man who controls money going into the family, and the woman and the children are both dependent on the man to provide money, so then they are slaves, just like the workers are slaves to the capitalist ruling classes, the bourgeois, right? So, what's the solution? Create a system where everyone owns the means of production, and the women in all these families do no longer have to depend on their husbands for money, and even the children don't have to depend on their parents for sustenance either. The abolition of the family, he called it. He wanted to abolish the family by creating one class, everyone in a massive commune with collective property. If you don't want to look after your kids, don't worry, they'll be looked after by general society anyway. If you don't want to look after your wife, or your wife doesn't look after you, no problem, you'll be provided by general societies and so on. So no one depends on anyone else for money. Because depending on people for money is slavery, according to Karl Marx. Right? And that'd be very influential because socialists were obviously debating liberals. And the socialists would say, well, you liberals, I know you might give women equal rights, an equal right to vote, but in the traditional families, women are still slaves because they depend on their husband for money. Right? So we need to liberation. And the liberal goes, I don't understand though, but women have the same legal rights. Is that enough? And now their back and forth debate would be between those two. You could have a liberal feminist debating a socialist feminist, and they would be against each other, even though they both call themselves feminist. Right? So, now I want to mention, because this talk is really about Neo-Marxist feminism, it's very important, or what you might call woke. Right, you call it woke, or you know it by woke. Why Neo-Marxism? Why is this term Neo-Marxism? Neo-Marxism was simply a term to mean a new type of Marxist. Karl Marx wasn't a prophet, Kelsterpriest. So he made his predictions that, according to his worldview and his formulas, the most advanced capitalist countries would be the ones that would be the next candidates for socialist revolution, or he predicts, and the workers would take over, and it would become a dictatorship of the proletariat, where the state would be owned by the people, so to speak, and the state would redistribute resources and so on and so forth, and then the next step would be communism, whereby the state dies away and everyone just lives in an anarchist communist utopia, basically. Yeah, so long story short, that didn't happen. He predicted that wages would keep going down and profits would keep going up, and of course that didn't happen either. That workers' rights were instituted. He didn't predict that either. The proletariat, the working class of England, seemed to be more content than ever under capitalism against his predictions. So that failed. Although he passed away, of course, and then all these Marxists that came after him tried to explain. And as I said yesterday, they said, his predictions aren't working out. Marxism is just wrong then, let's just move away from it, okay. No, they didn't do that. They just say, maybe we just tweak it a bit, right, and we can make it work still. So what did they do? Well, they the only answer was like, well, why aren't the workers rising up? Yeah, because surely we've told them they're being oppressed. We're trying to create class consciousness amongst them as a class of people, that you're an oppressed class. Realize who you are, join with your brothers and sisters, and rise up against your oppressors. But they aren't doing it though. They seem very content. They think and actually they start to think the Marxists are crazy. What's going on? So the Neo-Marxists developed an idea. Well, if the West seems more comfortable for workers than it was before, if there's workers' rights, if there's all these wages, there's a minimum wage, and there's universal suffrage for working class men initially, and then obviously eventually women too. That seems to go against Karl Marx's ideas that about these oppressed classes would rise up. Don't they realize their oppression? Don't they realize that they're still stuck in an oppressive system? And they came up with the idea that, wait a second, it's on purpose, all this. The ruling classes do this deliberately to make the working classes think they're having rights, think they're cared for, think that they matter and that they have a comfortable existence, but that only entrenches them more into their oppression because they don't even realize they're oppressed. That was their argument. And a lot of it came, strangely enough, from the encounter with Sigmund Freud. Right? Sigmund Freud introduced something quite radical into European thought. By the way, you don't have to write everything down. At the end of this week, all these slides will be made available for you. You can download. But we're going to put the download link on Friday, because you have to attend Friday. Friday's the big finale. It's going to be memorable, let's just put it like that. Right? So you can download all this from the link given out on Friday. I know someone can say, I'll just get my friend to go and then I will just download it. Okay, wait, fine. But anyway. Okay, don't have to read everything on the slide, but basically I'm just going to summarize what's on the slide. But in essence, it kind of breaks it down for you for those who want details. But in essence, Sigmund Freud's main idea was that people have subconscious ideas, right? Hidden ideas from themselves. Okay? So the Marxists believed that you have the economic system, all right? You have this economic system. I wonder if does these things work? You know, I'm in the mood to draw. Okay, so economic system. Too low? Okay, well, this is the economic system, and it creates something called, the superstructure. Or ideology, if you like. Although the superstructure includes buildings, or like government buildings and things like this, but this is the non-physical aspect of superstructure. So, for those of you who attended yesterday, this might sound crazy, and if you didn't attend, just take my word for it and check it out for yourself. Karl Marx is a materialist. He thinks ideas are just a reflection of the physical world in your head. So your culture isn't something that was about religion or revelation, or something that was developed by artists and philosophers and poets in the past. No. Your culture comes from the economic system being reflecting in your head. Your society's structure, hierarchy, everything is reflected in your head. And your head is basically contained, your head has a little, like if this is the capitalist system, right, I'm going to use a green one, but it's okay, that's not working. Alright, so if I'm trying to do a triangle. If this is the capitalist system, then you as an individual, you have it in your head, right? This capitalist system, and but you see it as religion, you see it as culture, as ethics, and so on and so forth. But really, you're just reflecting a physical set of networks, which is social relations and economic relations in your head. He literally said that. Like we went through it yesterday. So like take my word for it. So then neo-Marxists tried to understand that a bit more, but it seemed a bit weird because, like, reflection of society in the brain. How does that work? Why don't the workers realize their oppression then if they can reflect society into their heads? But Sigmund Freud gave them the possibility that maybe the workers just don't realize it. right? And maybe the workers have been given ideas in their head like they are equal, that they have rights, that they are sovereign over themselves. These are capitalist ideas that make them think they live in a good society, a society where they are respected, but really they are abused and they are manipulated and so on and so forth. So he argues that society causes the oppression of individual desires, which linked into Karl Marx's idea of alienation, which we covered yesterday, which I won't go into now, whereby you suffer because you don't live as your true self, in essence. And this led to the development of the Frankfurt School, which was a school designed to study why the working class and others aren't rising up against their oppressors in the West. Okay, and these are called the beginning of Neo-Marxists, basically. And they took the ideas from Sigmund Freud, a little bit of Nietzsche, just sprinkled in there, and they came up with taking some of Karl Marx's ideas about the point of philosophy isn't to just describe society as it is, but to change it. They took the idea and they developed something called Ideologie critique, critical theory, right? To, in a way, criticize and expose the hidden oppressive structures in society so that the working classes can wake up, see this, and then grab their guns and start an uprising, basically, or something like that, right? Like to wake up the working classes because they don't realize their oppression. But then the question was that, well, there's more than one, why are we doing this, right? Why are we fighting for the oppressed classes? Well, it's because they are a class identified by attribute. They don't have capital, they don't own capital. And there are those who are a different attribute class above them who have more power, i.e. more privilege than them. And that's wrong, right? That's what we're fighting against. But, oh, wait a second though, that's not the only, if you look at other identities that humans have, because humans have other attributes of themselves, there seems to be other correlations we found between skin color, between gender, and eventually between sexual orientation, between ableism, and eventually between transgender versus cisgender versus non-binary or what have you, or transgender. So the principle is that everyone that has an attribute should have the same amount of power and privileges in society as anyone else with other attributes. And that's how you destroy classes, because there's not only the working class versus the ruling class, there are other classes that are there. And the critical theory began to investigate all of those things simultaneously and explain that the reason why they have this stratification is deliberate. There's a deliberate ideology created by the ruling society. So yeah, they mentioned that the Enlightenment Project, because these are people who are part of the Enlightenment Project, but they think that the Enlightenment Project failed. Liberalism didn't deliver true liberation of the individual. They're going to deliver it. They say that liberal society creates false individuality. You're not an individual, you're following mass-produced culture, mass-produced products and so on. You're not really individuals. We need to make this obvious to people that they're not truly individuals in liberal society. They argued that academics don't trust academics and scholars because they are products of the culture. They are products of ideology, the ruling set of ideas in society, and so they can never really explain what's really happening. They can't think outside the box. Okay? In fact, their purpose is to reinforce the box, right? And you might think, oh, I never heard this idea before. Well, you did, because Audre Lorde, you heard when she replicated this idea, when she said that the master's tools will not take down the master's house, right? She didn't invent that idea. It comes from the Frankfurt School a couple of decades before her. But many people were influenced by Neo-Marxism, hence it's so widespread. You have a question, brother?
How do Neo-Marxists understand the term good and bad, wrong or right? And Karl Marx himself didn't really use good and bad or good and evil these terms because these are not very materialistic terms.
Yeah.
How did the Neo-Marxists understood wrong or correct, especially when it comes to rule of class? So, class structure is wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so why, if Karl Marx didn't care about the ideas of equality, because he was so materialistic. He felt the idea of equality was a bourgeois idea that it was immaterial. It was just like justice, morals, good and bad don't mean anything in the material universe, right? So for him, he tried to treat humans like a science. But the neo-Marxists would change. Right? They would, and eventually they would change more because his Karl Marx's 1844 works, which weren't published when he died, were published much later in the 1930s, would become available. And his earlier ideas are more, they say, humanistic. They're about humans being individuals and expressing themselves and being able to be free and outside of the control of the kind of the machine that is, industrialist societies. Before he developed his Marxism a bit more further. So they said that they were less economic determinists than he was. That's why they're neo-Marxists and not full Marxists. And they took his idea that the social system was made up by economics. But what makes neo-Marxists different is that they say that once this ideology is created, right? If you were to destroy the economic system, the ideology could rebuild the system, right? Whereas Karl Marx said that the ideology emerges from the system, right? Like you have a projector, these projectors, right? You switch off the projector, the light disappears, yeah? So that's what Karl Marx would argue. The neo-Marxists would say the light doesn't disappear, the light continues and it somehow triggers reignites the lights in the projector to switch back on again. It reproduces itself, they'll say. Reproduction. That's why when you hear neo-Marxists talk about reproduction, they're not talking about their dating options. They're talking about how the ruling culture can remake the economic system, which, as you know, that Marxists believe, the economic system is the exact same as the social system. Your social relations are the exact same thing as the economic relations. So the neo-Marxists, that's what they are. They're like Karl Marx's children in a way. They're not exactly like the father. They've made some changes. They're a bit different, but they have his genes basically, right? Anyway.
So how do they define good and bad, wrong and correct? Like what is that?
How do they define good and bad? They don't care about good and bad, right? So before, humans would have the idea of God or religion, okay? Something like that would fit there, or you could call it law, like dharma in Sanskrit means law, and then you'd have humans being regulated by these things. Okay, humans being regulated by these things. Okay, this would determine good and bad. But you're a materialist. You don't think that exists. You think that individuals are the sovereign, so that there's no higher level than the individual. The individuals are the sovereign. So then they just wipe all this out. And they say, okay, so individuals are left, so then what determines good and bad? But say, well, the only thing that's left is if you only have individuals left, then the only measure left is to keep them exactly equal. That's the only measure of good and bad left. Right? There is no higher measure than that. So neo-Marxists don't care about what you might call good and bad or morality or ethics per se. They care that everyone is equal because privilege equals servitude of those who are less, those who don't have privilege, right? If someone is above here, okay, then everybody else are their slave, basically. Then it just becomes like this. And if you are a slave, then you're very unhappy. Right? You have been harmed. Right? Neo-Marxists always talk about harm, almost as much as utilitarian would. But they say that because privilege induces harm in those who lack it, basically. Yeah? So that is the good and bad of neo-Marxists. Okay. So if the ideology reproduces itself, then if you can change the economic system, but the ideology still remains, then what should you be targeting? Anyone? Do you keep targeting the economic system? What do you target then?
The ideology.
Right, the ideology, yeah. You have to destroy the ideology itself. And then, once you destroy that, then the people can be free to all be exactly equal. Because then the question was, well, where do people's privilege come from? Right? People's privilege, they come from having more money and what have you, yes. But they say, because we're all equal minds, right, from Descartes, we're all equal minds. If you think that you deserve something better than someone else, this has been created in you. Well, they don't believe that God did it because they don't think God exists. So they think it's because society put it into you. The unfair society you came out of. Because like Karl Marx, they think your head contains the ideology of a society that was built on unfair principles. Yeah? So society has created in you ideas and concepts of privilege. Okay? And they use that to explain every single relation between humans in society. And I mean every. Brother in the back.
So do they believe that the child is like is the same as the parent when it comes to the roles?
Do they believe the child is the same as the parent when it comes to roles? Well, no, they would say, they would concede that the child hasn't developed into full maturity, hasn't attained a full adult mind. So no, they would say the child depends on the parents until the child becomes an adult individual, and then they are independent. Yes, that's what they would generally say. Okay, so they'll say that the power structure, like ideology, is based on an illusion. Because it doesn't represent truly how human beings should be. These are social constructs. They're constructed by society, but more specifically, who in society has the most power to make stories and fund films and, write books and publish them? Yeah, who does? Who has the most power? The rich, yeah, and they'll say not just the rich, but relatively speaking, males and females and heteronormative or phallocentric, whatever, versus queer or homosexual identity attributes classes. So the critical theory is a method of destruction of the idea of Western ideology as it is, right? It's a method to refute it. It's about breaking it apart. But what it really does is it does exactly what I did when I debated some of his brothers as a Zionist here for playing devil's advocate. What they do is they simply simply insert a conspiracy theory into the power structures of society. They say these weren't developed by process of just, of climate, historical forces, revelation, interpretation of revelation, human nature. No, that they put to the side. No. It's all deliberately created by the ruling classes to reinforce and reproduce their privilege and power. And even if you have no idea in your head that you're better than anybody else, but you have a negative encounter of some way with someone who is deemed to be of a disadvantaged identity class versus you, and let's say you don't get along with that person, you just don't get along with them, you have disagreement, okay? That won't be interpreted as you just disagree with one other person. No. That's you reinforcing your particular privilege against them by attacking them, by disagreeing with them, by denying their power because you disagree. Disagree means you're negating their opinion. And isn't that not an unequal power relation? But we mutually disagree with each other. Like, I don't see how but you're doing it socially though. You see, you're putting a block on that person. You're saying that your ideas cannot go any further. Yeah, just because you don't agree with them, right? So they have a different lens, a different interpretation. Just a sec. So the writer George R.R. Martin, I believe, spoke for one of his characters. It was a very interesting quote I saw. Someone had a little meme with this quote. I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Where's this come from? So apparently Game of Thrones or whatever. But it was interesting. It was some character who was a bit devious in the books or in the TV series, and he said, "I like to play a game. I like to imagine what's the worst possible motivation that someone I know could ever have. The worst possible motivation they have. Then I see how well does that explain what they do and say. Right? How well does thinking the worst of them, of their motivations, explain what they do or say? Okay? Then you might think, that won't work for everybody. No, you can interpret everything negatively. everything. Yeah. So brother comes up, gives me some water with ice in it. What, you want to give me a cold or something? Oh, what, you think I'm not capable of getting my own water? I have to be served by you because I'm some rich kid. I'm not, but anyway, I'm just some kind of guy that used to be served, and I can't get my own stuff. I'm not independent to get my own water. You see how I just interpreted that? Yeah. So from that lens, if you are deemed to be in a identity class which has any kind of privilege, any relation you have with another class which is deemed to have lower privilege by Neo-Marxists, will be interpreted negatively, whichever you do, including nothing. Okay? And so then you think, well, then what do Neo-Marxists argue then? How would they argue what you should do? Yeah? Well, they simply say, your job is to be silent and just amplify whatever those of the lesser privileged identity class say. You just have to repeat what they say like a parrot, or just give them your platform or whatever, give them your social media login details and just post on your own. So that kind of stuff. You're only there to amplify. You can't do that. If you truly want to abolish kind of inequalities in power. That's how they would say, Neo-Marxists would say, across all of them. Now, I'm summarizing, there's a lot of nuances here, but postmodernism, post-structuralism. So Gramsci is a very interesting individual because he was the one who really took Marxism into Neo-Marxism properly. He was the one who talked about ideology and cultural hegemony. So if you hear people talk about hegemony, well, you can thank Gramsci for this. He was the one, he tried to reinterpret Marx. He didn't believe Marx was wrong, or he didn't want to say Marx was wrong. He just said that, no, I think what Marx was trying to say was that, ideology can exist separately from the economic system in a way, and reproduce it. It can be detached, the head can be detached from the body and rebuild the body. Doesn't depend on the head doesn't depend on the body. So, he was the one who talked about hegemony is maintained via institutional organizations, church, trade unions, schools, and so on and so forth. He was the one who argued that the state it teaches the people these ideas of ideology through certain mechanisms and so on and so forth. So Neo-Marxists are very much interested in education because they feel that the education institutions are the places where the state reinforces its ruling ideology. And so if they can get in there with pedagogy course discussions and training courses and things like this, they can then really change your mindset and get rid of these false ideas. And you might think, what false ideas in particular, Abdullah? Well, we'll get to that to a degree, but basically, because they descend from Descartes, they don't believe that the human being has a nature and kind of certain predilections, right? If you were to say, well, of course men are more aggressive because they have testosterone. No, how dare you say that? No, that's not testosterone. It's because they have toxic masculinity. It's an idea. It's not a hormone. You say, but like if we look at the animal kingdom, animals of different genders tend to behave rather differently. Say, oh, no, we're human, we're talking about humans here, we're a separate creature, let's just forget animals, we're just talking about humans, they don't have intellects, we have intellects, and we can decide for ourselves what we are and what our essence is, and you have a choice between either being autonomous, like deciding for yourself, or being authentic, or you can let society socially construct you. As Karl Marx said, that your head is the ensemble of social relations. Remember yesterday that your head just contains the reproduction of society in it. So for them, they want to argue that that everything that you believe, your character, your decisions, your choices are due to ideas planted in your head by society. There's nothing in your head, in your mind, or nothing in your brain that is affected by hormones so much. Right? Or that makes you do what you're doing. So if 95% of prisons are filled by men, that's because of toxic masculinity. That's not because of testosterone just does crazy things. Right? Especially when men metabolize 20 times more testosterone per day than women do. Oh no, that has no effect at all. It's just toxic masculinity. Or they'll say, for example, that like when men go outside, even at night, you don't tend to think about, I'm scared about, someone could attack me and molest me, or rob me, for most parts of Vancouver perhaps. Men don't tend to think that at all. You just go for a nighttime run, no problem, right? But then women would report that they feel not fully comfortable going out at 2 o'clock in the morning at night down dark alleyways. They don't feel as comfortable. But men seem to be not so bothered about it. How is that explained? Well, you could say, because men tend to be stronger. No one really, it can happen, but no one really rapes men exactly, although there are cases. But it's a much lower probability, let's just say, especially because you have to overpower a man, and you have to make sure that you're a man that can overpower the men, and so on and so forth. It's just lower probability, right? That's what it is. No, that's not the case. That's not the case. Men seem to be comfortable going out, and women are scared because men want to create a space that privileges them to own the public spaces and keep women on the sides, basically. It's all deliberate, okay? Because there's no such thing as you having a real essence to yourself, that an essential nature. No. It's socially constructed into you to have that, basically. That's how they would argue it from their worldview. They have to argue this from their worldview. And so me coming here and, let's say, criticizing Neo-Marxism and feminism and so on, they cannot interpret what I do because they think I truly believe that the creator of the universe has mandated, who knows human beings better than we do, and mandates rights and so on and so forth, and he's the only one who can do so. No, they can't interpret that because, well, they say God doesn't exist, yes, but even those who kind of somewhat believe in God, they think that human beings are incapable of being objective or following anything objective. Okay, so we're all subjective, they'll say. Everyone's subjective, but we have to be equal then. Because the objectivity is a capitalist bourgeois invention, right? To make capitalism seem to be universal and reified. That's a Marxist term, don't worry, you have to memorize all these terms. Anyway, so they would have to they'd look at me and they'd have to interpret me that I'm someone who is supporting male privilege, and I'm racist against anyone who's not white adjacent or what have you. Or if I'm Arab supremacist again, and so on and so on and so forth. They have to, because why would I be criticizing Neo-Marxism? Neo-Marxism is the truth, right? It is how human beings are. And if I'm criticizing Neo-Marxism, it's because I'm against the rights that Neo-Marxism wants. The rights for women, and of course because Neo-Marxism believes that its rights for women are the only real rights, then I must be criticizing it because I don't like women and I'm misogynist or I'm racist or what have you. They have to believe that because they've adopted that worldview. They have to. They can't see me any other way. Right? It's sad, actually. I feel sorry for those individuals, but that's the case. And of course conservatives. Now, I was going to mention this little point. Conservatives, everyone has these ideological lenses. Conservatives don't fully understand, of course, Neo-Marxism or Marxism either. They don't understand each other. So the conservative thinks that Neo-Marxists just want to destroy Western civilization for fun, right? Which is not the case. They don't. They feel they are creating a better civilization, right? But the conservative thinks that the social institutions which are important for human flourishing and provides the bedrock of classical liberalism or basic liberalism, which is justice for the conservative. If these neo-Marxists want to take it down, then they must be, because they have a sense of entitlement, they're not being satisfied with this sense of entitlement, and therefore they want to destroy Western civilization. And the neo-Marxists and the conservatives will speak past each other, right? Because they just don't understand, because their lenses program them to view each other in this particular lens, okay? Of course, from our perspective, we're guided beyond subjectivity by the creator of the universe to understand that this is all the kufr vanities of people's speculation. But hey, what do we know? We just have the creator of the universe telling us these things. Huh? Okay, post-structuralism, and then we'll just end quickly on some feminist points. Post-structuralism emanates from existentialism in essence, ironically, the belief that existence precedes essence. You, as a human being, precedes any idea of essence. You don't have an essence at all. They started to disagree. This caused Marxists to disagree with Marxism itself. They say Marx believed that your nature is just a mixture of society inside you. They say that's too deterministic, right? You can determine your essence yourself. In a way, that makes humans God, doesn't it? Gods, because you can make yourself, create yourself. It's ridiculous, but really, this is what I call the apotheosis of the individual. Making the individual into deities. So postmodernists they're not a particular ideology exactly. They are more like a rejection of our previous ideologies. So they became disillusioned with Marxism and Neo-Marxism, and they believe that Neo-Marxism and Marxism are just meta-narratives or grand narratives. This is a postmodernist term, which are false or because they believe that there is no such thing as a narrative that is decidable. As in, we don't know for certain anything. They believe as an absolute certainty that all narratives are uncertain, which technically is a narrative. If you're a true skeptic, you believe that there could be certainty, but you haven't yet encountered it. Whereas they say, no, there is. They say that reality is like infinitely interpretable. You can interpret anything from reality. So then, do away with narratives. Like throw them out the window, basically. Usually, I was going to explain how postmodernists, how they evolve different aspects of Marxism, but it's beyond the scope of this lecture. So I'll just go straight into modern critical theory movements. So critical theory gets applied to different areas. You get critical legal studies tries to study how ideology makes the law, is embedded into law. But then you have critical gender studies, or Marxism feminism, which looks at society from the lens of gender classes. Critical race theory, race lens. Queer theory, sexuality lens. And of course disability theory, I bet you didn't know that one. You look for the lens of disability, how this ableism and disabled are considered to be lesser human beings, and this is a privileged power relation. So this is what they would argue. So really, to recap what I've said here, feminism really has waves depending on the ideologies which are becoming dominant in the West. So the first wave feminists are classical liberals. Okay, they just want women to be under equal application of law to women. Second wave is social liberalism, which we covered on Monday. Yeah, equal opportunity, basically. You know it as equal opportunity, so that women should have the same opportunities to go to jobs and make money and so on and so forth. The third and fourth wave is a mixture of neo-Marxist and post-Marxist, or you could say postmodernist feminisms. The idea, this is where you get gender theory springing out of things, which we will cover in just a second. But feminists will generally agree on a few things. A liberal feminist might agree that society can encourage gender roles as a good idea, and you might know them as social conservatives. Right? These are early form of liberals, but they believe in liberality or liberalism as a law system, in a way, the liberal classical law system. But they believe that society can encourage certain traditional roles or whatever roles, gender roles, and so on and so forth. Whereas social liberal feminists, second wave feminists, believe that gender roles or the encouragement of gender roles limits women's opportunities to do whatever they wish, basically, and they, being influenced by socialists, believe that women's emancipation means that women need to have their own income stream, otherwise they're not emancipated. Okay, so differing schools of thought, the different madhahib of feminism, they're not really madhahib of feminists. They're more just different madhahib, different schools of thought in Western philosophy. But these are just the women's wing of each of these philosophies. The only exception is radical feminism, which I'll get to in a second. So socialist feminism is known for believing that the capitalism creates inequality, but also patriarchy. So they look at the universe through the lens of race, gender and wealth, gender and class. Marxist feminists just look at it only through class, just only class analysis. They think that gender analysis and racial analysis are explainable by class as class mechanisms, but not in of themselves. They're not separate types of hierarchy that maintain themselves independently. They just spring out of the capitalism itself to maintain the bourgeois elite. You have material feminism, which is Marxist feminism, but capitalism, patriarchy isn't the only reasons for inequality. Then they look at other things. Anarcho-feminists, basically, the way to women's liberation is no state, no problem. So if there's no government, then no problem. There'll be no different laws, different treatments of women. Classical liberal feminism, of course, everyone equal under the law. Liberal feminism, or mainstream or social liberal feminism, which is legal and social equality. So women have to be in a society where they have the same social opportunity to get a career and be successful and by defined as having lots of money if they want to be, and there should be no impediments to that. So so social liberals implemented sexual harassment laws, whereas classical liberals wouldn't recognize sexual harassment laws. They'll say freedom of speech, no problem. All right. Radical feminists are the opposite. So what's the best way to get rid of the patriarchy? Create a matriarchy instead, right? Because women can do it better and women won't be oppressors, right? Because as you know, because women are just humans, and as you know, like only some humans are oppressed. And it's not like all humans would ever potentially oppress or could oppress, because some humans are perfect, right? And other humans are not perfect. Anyway, so this has variations. You have separatist feminism, which is basically let's stay away from the men because men just are incorrigible, and to do that, unfortunately, because women are dependent on men, not just for money, but unfortunately, which we need to change, but they also depend on men for physical reproduction. So the best way to solve that is lesbianism. I know it's a stereotype, but no, this is true. You just check it out yourself. Political lesbianism, apparently. You have radical libertarian feminism, which is why don't we, gender is a kind of construct, so let's get rid of the idea altogether. If there's no gender, there's no problem. We already live in one class, we'll be in one class, basically, but just one gender, in essence. Then there's female supremacy feminism, which is basically let women rule and let women be the top, because even if they are oppressors, they won't be as bad as men, basically. You have cultural feminism, which is kind of what radical feminism has become more into now, after they've calmed down from the more heydays of the 60s and 70s, which were a bit more rough and ready back then, a bit more radical. So for them, they would argue that, look, it's not feminism to deny that women might have different qualities to men. All right? Maybe, it's not feminism to deny, you can affirm that maybe women have certain qualities that are actually, femininity is a thing, and we should celebrate those qualities. So instead of having these stereotypical female heroes on movies where they kind of shave their head and they do weights and all this kind of, they carry guns, and that's the way to make a woman seem to be equal to a man and give equal respect. No, why can't women be praised for femininity itself? And femininity is something that we should inculcate more into society, and maybe make society based on femininity, actually, because femininity is the better solution to the opposite, which is toxic masculinity. Right? So that would be, so you could say it's not female supremacy, but supremacy of female attributes and virtues. Because they'll say that the problem in society is that it values masculine virtues and attributes and so on and so forth. And of course, we have these type of feminists in the UK. I'm not sure how they fare in Canada. Have they all been wiped out? But they're called TERFs, trans exclusionary feminists. They believe that feminism is for women, females, not people who identify as women. Right? They reject gender theory. Basically, they say that's not. They are controversial in the UK, but they're left wing like anybody else. But the left wing fight themselves. By the way, there's major wars between the left wing. Remember, because if you can identify yourself as any gender you want and make more genders than just two, you can also technically identify as any race you want. But the neo-Marxists would think that's just like, if a white person says, and there was a case I saw a little debate on, I think it was Channel 4 UK, between a gentleman who identified as a Korean, he's white, but identified as a Korean, and there was a neo-Marxist lady who was Afro-Caribbean, which is the UK term for, it's like, African American, we say Afro-Caribbean as the terminology of choice in the UK. She argued against him for doing so because it had the potential for a white person to say, I identify as black, right? And that would be whites taking over the black identity, right? But identity is a social construct. and you should be free to choose any identity you want. And now you see the fight that would happen between the left wing. They're full of fights and they're full of contradictions. So yeah, single issue positions, you have trans feminism, so you can accept people who identify as women, that's not a problem. Sex negative feminism, which is that women should not be objectified into sex objects, that demeans them. And of course you have sex positive feminism, which is, I think, named because it's feminists that believe that women should celebrate sexuality, and if they want to be prostitutes, great. If they want to be porn models and what have you, great. Let's celebrate that. As long as they're getting paid for it, no problem. So I think it was named after just being positive about sex as opposed to the results they receive on their STD checks. Okay. Right. So what's the Islamic response? All right, and we'll end it very quick soon. As was mentioned, the Quran says, "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. And the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you." So there is no greater value, there is no moral value in gender in the eyes of the Creator. But there is different moral values. There can be people who are better than others based on what you choose to do. Your righteousness, your actions, you can choose your moral value, right? And you could be better than other people, but just don't say you're better than other people, because then that will reduce your value, of course, yeah? But you can be better in the eyes of the Creator. We'll also see in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the actions of males and females. God says, "I waste not the work of any of you, of any that work among you, be you male or female, the one of you is as the other." So basically we're from each other, our actions are the same. So if a woman gives 5 Canadian dollars as charity and a man gives 5 Canadian dollars as charity, and they're both from the same economic status, whatever, it would be the same reward for both of them for doing the same actions. It wouldn't be because the man gets more reward because he's a man and the woman gets more reward because she's a woman. None of that stuff. Of course, the Quran says, "And the male is not like the female." There is a difference between us. It's not socially constructed. If you believe that to be the case, you are contradicting the Quran itself. Men are the caretakers of women, as men have been provisioned by Allah over women and tasked with supporting them. But we'll get to that verse. Now, it's not like, there are Muslims, of course, who have adopted left-wing ideas, adopted any of these particular madhabs of the West. Not necessarily because they're nefarious or evil, but because they weren't educated in Islamic politics or Islamic law or Islamic system of Sharia and the Ahkam, and they don't understand the wisdom behind it. But they're not the only ones. Most Muslims don't. And so the Islamic system seems very archaic and weird and strange and just, it doesn't make sense. And so then, because of that, they think, well, the Quran, if we still believe in the Quran, then the Quran believes in justice, but following those laws today doesn't look like justice to us. So maybe what God wants us to do is He wants us to see what the recent updates about justice are that are coming from the West, and we should just follow what they say if it makes sense to us. Oh, this equality idea seems a good, simple principle. Let's adopt it. What's the worst that could happen? And this will lead them, as led many people, to adopt ideas, but when they reopen the Quran, they see the Quran says things which are quite contradictory to that set of ideas that they've adopted. So what do? They use a bit of mental gymnastics on the Quran and say, oh, the Quran doesn't mean what you think it means. This word that everyone for 1400 years think it means that one. No, it actually meant something else, right? It just got corrupted by men, by white adjacent Arabs, by ableists, by heterosexuals, and so on and so forth. Yeah, some of these individuals will argue, right, that people's sexual orientation is just an identity attribute, and it is of equal moral value to another sexual orientation, because it's just an attribute that you are identified with, and therefore they will interpret the verse on Qawm Lut as that the problem of Qawm Lut wasn't that they preferred to sleep with men in derogation of women, which is what the verse of the Quran says. No, it's because they didn't do it consensually. They raped men, so it wasn't consensual. So that's strange, because the Quran doesn't seem to mention anything about consent, right? I mean, like, is God a poor communicator? He left a very important thing out that would cause you to misunderstand. Well, they don't deal with that. They just say, no, but if I just take the Quran, just like if I squint a bit, and I just like, yeah, I can make out my interpretation out of it. Yeah, they have to account to Allah that but they have fooled themselves into it because they think that's what justice requires, and so they will retrofit their these Western ideas into the Quran, called eisegesis instead of exegesis. So the Islamic understanding is equality is not a value in Islam in terms of believing something to be identical. We don't believe that everyone is identical. We believe that everyone starts out with equal moral worth in the eyes of the Creator, yes, of course. But that doesn't mean that you have to have the same amount of power. Okay, I use this example, but it probably doesn't work in Canada very much. In England, certain policemen can have guns. Not all, but some can have guns. You're not allowed to have guns. There's no permit you can ever get. They banned it after the Dunblane massacre. And you'd say, that's not fair. How come the police get to have guns? They have a privilege. They have guns, and I don't have guns. That's not fair. Of course, it would be explained in England, of course, that, well, actually, the police have to take a bullet for you. They have to put their lives on the line for you. And so because they have that duty to you, they get that privilege. And so it's no longer a privilege, it's just a responsibility. So with power comes something, not from a Disney movie or some Hollywood movie, but with power comes a commensurate duty. All right? Okay. So in Islam, what men are given in terms of higher responsibilities or some degrees of decision making and kind of stewardship over the family comes with it a commensurate amount of responsibility and duty. Okay, so women don't have to look after men, grown men that is, in Islam, but men have to look after women, have to die to protect women, defend them, and so on and so forth. Yeah? You can die a martyr in Islam, dying to protect your women in your family. Right? Whereas the woman is not expected to put her life on the line for you, right? Sounds rather callous, but no, but of course it's because this is the roles. In nature, animals, fellow creatures that Creator made have roles amongst themselves. Whether it's in well, people quote lions, but technically the lion is quite lazy and just basically patrols and pushes out all the lions from its territory, and the female lionesses are the ones that hunt. But anyway, people say he's like a lion. So he's lazy and lets his women work for him. Anyway, but in essence, there are roles in animal kingdom. I like to look at the example of ants. Right, the bigger ant is the soldier. They have big heads with big mandibles. They don't do the work as the worker ants do, right? Now, I suppose a Marxist analysis would say this is because they are justifying a system of oppression against the proletariat ants, controlled by the bourgeois queen. Well, of course they would. If they were humans, they would say that was the case. But they're ants, so they would say, they can't say anything about the ants. But in essence, that's what Marx probably would say, or Neo-Marxism would say. But what do the soldier ants have to do? They have to protect the hive, and they will die. The soldier ants are not generally the first line guys when they encounter a rival ant colony. They can kill the ants by pulling apart their legs and things like that, but they don't really have the big mandibles to do that. So you have a specialist soldier class in society. Of course, they all serve the queen, right? So it's a matriarchy, basically, right? So if aliens came to planet Earth and looked at human beings, what would they conclude? They'd conclude that, there's one type of human has more aspects of reproduction on their body. They basically can nurture babies and gestate them. And the other one doesn't have those things, but seems to be greater muscle mass, greater long-term endurance, running, fitness, and of course, height and stature and strength. So what would the alien conclude if they were zoologists and we were the ones being studied as animals? What would they conclude about us? The males would appear to be the soldier class of society, maybe hunter class possibly, because they have more bursts of energy they have longer endurance. That's why no one believes that the athletics or football games should stop being gender segregated. You know, oh, you're against gender segregation. Oh, really good. Okay, well, let's have everyone compete in the Olympics. Everyone compete in the football. You know, if you did, it'd only be men, right? And that's why women would say not to let in transgender, because that's men taking over women's sports, because women can't compete against men in physical sports. Okay, and as we know, that's because of men are socially constructed. So that's why they are superior in physical force. I'm joking. So, but. You know, I've seen some neo-Marxists, well, gone down that route anyway. Islamic response to class-based analysis. Do you think that good and bad is all about class? The Quran doesn't seem to think so. What does it say? If only you could see when the wrongdoers will be detained before their Lord, throwing blame at each other. The lowly ones will say to the arrogant, the oppressors basically, had it not been for you, we would certainly have been believers. And the arrogant, or the upper class, will respond to the lowly, did we hinder you from guidance after it came to you? In fact, you were wicked on your own. The lowly will say to the arrogant, no, it was your plotting by day and night when you ordered us to disbelieve in Allah and to set up equals with Him. And they all will hide their remorse when they see the torment. They're all going to be punished. All together, the oppressor class and the oppressed, because they all disbelieved in God's revelations. They disbelieved in the truth, but they were more involved in their own internal issues. Interesting, it mentions equality, setting up equals with God. In the Quran, equality is never really mentioned in a positive way, ever. Not equal is the good and the bad, right? Those setting up equals to God. The word equality is generally not mentioned in a positive light in the Quran anywhere it's used. Interesting enough, I was quite surprised when I was younger and I was reading this and saying, oh, why is he not saying this? So it's not about oppressor and oppressed. It's about, do you believe in truth? Do you believe in justice? Do you believe in who created you? And do you believe in implementing the rights and obligations that He mandated upon us? That's what we're judged upon. Right? And interesting, those who are on the lower rung of society are saying that, or what we told, when you ordered us to disbelieve in Allah and to set up equals with Him. Okay? One could argue that the ruling classes or the intelligentsia telling everybody that we all are sovereign over ourselves, we all are individuals, we all own ourselves, we all get to decide what is good and bad. That's setting up equals with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's even the neo-Marxists who rail against the capitalist system believe in that exact same doctrine. Yeah, that we are the sovereign, as we are sovereign individuals. They just think that the best way to manifest that is not in a capitalist system. They want to change it because they think the capitalist system doesn't really allow you as an individual to manifest your individual godhood, to be authentic, to follow your own will, all right, to determine your own essence. Okay, very fascinating, the Quranic verses. Subhanallah. The Islamic response to relativism: not equal are the good deed and the bad, or not equal are the evil and the good, although the abundance of evil might impress you. So very quickly then, and then we wrap up. Gender is a social construct. You have Judith Butler to blame for this. Don't worry, I just put the quotation on there so that you can see I'm not making it up and you can see where I get it from. That my style, as my students will tell you, is I like to put block quotations on my presentation slides with the summary at the top, because I believe that no one should take my word for it. You know, I'm a patriarchal kind of man, and was subjective, and that was a heteronormative and ableist. So, of course, I can't be trusted. Fine, but you can trust evidence and facts which have been quoted and referenced. Yeah, I'm all about quotations and references. You can't argue against them. You can always check them yourself. Just copy and paste it into Google, find out where I got it from. You'll find it's right in their books. So she argues that gender is a constructed identity, and that the way to break gender itself is a restrictive force upon people. The idea of the socially constructed gender. So the best way to destroy gender roles is destroying gender itself. Okay, and that would lead the way to queer theory and the idea that you can choose your gender, you can identify as whatever you see fit. The Quranic response, of course, is the male is not like the female. We've encountered that before. the neo-Marxists would argue that the way neo-Marxist feminists will argue that the way to liberate women is to create class consciousness, just like the Marxists did, because they're from the same genetic root, so to speak, ideologically speaking. But instead of creating a class consciousness of workers, you create class consciousness of women. You have to, you have to have meetings with women, and we'll all talk about how men oppress us and how it's actually deliberately so. And they'll sit by telling women that, do you know when, like, men, you think some man talked down to you yesterday? Well, that wasn't because that guy was just an irritating person who everyone finds annoying. No. He was doing it deliberately to you as a woman from his class as a man. So they put the conspiracy theory into the, right? And they call it consciousness raising. Okay, got it from the Marxists, and they themselves mention it, where they got it from. The old left, the Marxists, they will tell you where they got it from, not me just telling it to you. The Quran mentions that this is a form of asabiya. The Arabic word asabiya, Arabs think it means being angry today, just being angry. But it actually originally comes from grouping together. But it got changed over many centuries because it got applied to the word nerves. You know, nerves, like get on your nerves. Nerves are tightly wound together. So asabiya, grouped together, and hence it became get on your nerves, get angry, right? But its Fusha meaning, it's a classical Arabic meaning, is forming groups, factions. Right? Forming groups that is not ordained by the Creator. So the Quran tells us, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah all together and do not be divided. Also, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, he is not one of us who calls to asabiya. Sectarianism, factionalism is the best translation. He is not one of us who fights for the sake of asabiya. He is not one of us who dies for the sake of asabiya. And in another narration, asabiya is defined as defending your own group even when they're wrong. Right? Because if someone's in the right, then you follow what is justice and right. But if they're in the wrong, if one of your members of your group or your class has made a mistake, done something really bad, and you choose to defend them because, well, they're part of my group, I must defend them against these men, then you've committed asabiya. Right, created by neo-Marxists, because neo-Marxists, like Karl Marx, said the only way to liberate yourself is you form a group and then you can fight. Okay? So you can't do that as individuals. You have to form a class, recognize you are a class by recognizing that you're oppressed, and then fight. Standpoint epistemology. Standpoint epistemology, which is basically the argument that the oppressed classes know better in a society what society is like, because they're outside, they get oppressed, they see the oppression on a day-to-day basis. So anyone who's in a lesser class or in any particular identity power relation should be believed no matter what. Right? You must take what they say because they know better than you. They have access to hidden knowledge. They see the hidden oppression that you don't see because you have privilege. Privilege is blind, they will argue. Right? You don't see it. And you say, well, could you explain to me objectively? Because we speak the human languages, so we should be able to communicate to each other universally, objectively, how someone's being oppressed. Of course, they can't because it is subjective. They'll say that, well, I felt really bad when my boss spoke to me this way. It's like, is that the same boss that speaks to everyone in a nasty way? Like, yeah, that one. He's a man, so I'm a woman, so he must have, spoke to me that way because he's a nasty person who hates women. It's like, well, no, he pretty much does it to everybody, but okay, if that's what you want to interpret it as. Because they say that knowledge is socially situated. Knowledge is created by society. It's situated in society. You can't be objective. You can't rise above it. Now, there's a great refutation of this, which I think I said yesterday, which is Adam alayhi salam was an individual. He was created before there was society. He was given intellect and language. Language was not socially constructed. It was divinely revealed. And he had intellect before there was even a second human being. To Marxists, that's impossible. Right? To neo-Marxists, that's impossible. Language is, in a way, all language derives from original revelation, right? But to the neo-Marxists, and certainly the post-structuralists, otherwise known as the postmodernist, No, language is arbitrary, made by human beings. Has no authority, no intrinsic authority, because it's made by human beings. Okay, power relations. Foucault, who is arguing, he's a French philosopher who's obviously he's postmodernist. He's not neo-Marxist. He argues that power doesn't. He criticizes neo-Marxists. He says that power doesn't come from top down, but power is exercised by every individual in society against each other. And the problem is when people are given narratives that make them feel that they are part of, that gives them an unequal power relation, or they think they deserve an unequal power relation with anybody else. This would influence neo-Marxists to believe that on an everyday basis, every relationship you have with anybody else, if they're of a different or a higher identity attribute group than you in the hierarchy, that their negative relations with you are reproducing the power structure. So if you have a bad experience with someone identified as from a higher class, it's deliberate, even if it's unconscious in them. Because of Sigmund Freud, the guy who said that every guy secretly wants to sleep with his mother and kill his father. That guy. Yeah. So I'm not making this up. It's called the Oedipus complex, right? Does anyone here know? This is all new to you guys. It's like, what? No, just Google it, please. I am not making that one up. Okay. So they have a term for this. They call it microaggressions, basically, whereby on a day-to-day basis you are reinforcing the power structure by, even if you don't realize it. But who determines who's committing a microaggression, i.e., acting based on a stereotype? It will be the person that's receiving the microaggression gets to interpret that. And of course, because they're receiving it and because they're the oppressed class, if they tell you that what you're doing is microaggression and you ask, could you give me an objective reason why? No, I don't have to give you an objective reason why. I have special knowledge that you don't. So if you don't accept what I'm telling you, then you are limiting me and you are reinforcing the power structure against me. So if you don't accept what I'm telling you, you're an oppressor, basically. But you can't just tell me this is the case and I have to accept it. Could you at least give me tell me what was my words I used? Was it my tone of voice? Was it my facial expression? What was it that lent it to? No, I don't need to tell you this. You just need to accept it from me because you will never fully understand because you have privilege. Right? That's because knowledge is socially situated. It's not objective. Okay. Refutation of microaggressions. Microaggression is anything that's done that someone dislikes. Yeah. So if a man speaks to a woman and says to a woman that, okay, look, maybe you shouldn't wear a low-cut top and short mini skirt and makeup and so on and so forth. And she's like, you can't tell me what to do. Say, I know, but it's like a musalla, and we're about to pray, and you're like at the minbar, so it's not the best place, perhaps. So, how dare you tell me you're reproducing the patriarchal power relations by telling a woman what to wear, right? That's how they will interpret it. So, technically speaking, they should be, if anyone is allowed into the masjid, then they should be allowed with any clothes they desire, and they could be anywhere they want in the masjid. And if you tell them not to do that, they'll say that you have no right to do it, and you're just reproducing the power relations against yourself. But look what the Quran says, and tell the believing women to lower their gaze and guard their chastity and not to reveal their adornments. It also tells, and tell the believing men as well. It says the same thing, tell the believing men. Who's telling the believing women and men? All the believing in women and men, right? So if a man comes up with like Speedos or whatever you want to call like out of the pool, a woman can say, you're exposing your odor. And that's legitimate for her to say in Islam. She can tell a man that he's breaching Islamic rules, and that's totally fine. Good, say it. Yeah? But vice versa has to be the same thing too. Because the creator of the universe says, tells you to tell. Right? That's not a microaggression. And for the believers, both men and women, they are close unto one another. They enjoin the doing of what is right and forbid the doing of what is wrong. So women and men, they are close to one another, and they enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil. Men and women, we work together in joining what the creator of the universe has mandated. We should speak the truth, even if it is bitter. Sorry about people's feelings. It's not microaggression. As Muslims, we are obliged to speak the truth. You must speak the truth. And of course, standpoint epistemology, the idea that you know something better and that you can decide what is better, good and bad is determined by whether you feel comfortable or not, is a bad criteria for morality. Why? Because the Quran says, sorry, there's a hadith, but also there's Quran. If people were given in accordance with their claims, men would claim the wealth and lives of other people, but rather the burden of proof is upon the claimant. If anyone makes a claim, they need proof. If they don't have proof, you don't believe them. Okay? Oh, but believe all women, or believe all men, or whatever. No. Respect all women and men. Take seriously all women and men, but believe evidence. Right? And evidence has no gender. Right? And the Quran says, if the truth had been following their inclinations, the heavens and the earth, and whoever is in them would have been ruined. Okay? Basically, people's desires are not the basis for good and bad. If they tell you don't feel comfortable in your space, you say, okay, well, objectively, am I doing anything haram? Am I doing something that is a breach of Islamic adab or akhlaq, manners and decorum? No, then I can't. There's nothing I need to do. Then, I mean, I might do something out of courtesy. If you think that I'm eating crisps, and so I'm making crunchy noises and annoying you, okay, you know, I ate a lot of garlic today, a lot of tomia sauce, you know, the garlic sauce, and I shouldn't be going around saying, hi everybody, how are you doing? Kifa halak, right? Then maybe, okay, I get it, right? Okay, but even then there's a hadith that talks about not going to the mosque after having garlic, right? Anyway, the criticism of patriarchy. Because materialists think there's no higher principles, the only principle is left is everyone is equal. In Islam, you can have unequal power relations, but everyone is equally under the responsibility of the Sharia and subservient to it. The Quran says this, and we have a portion among them, their livelihood in the life of this world, and raised some of them above others in degrees, that they may make use of one another for service. Yeah? Or men are in charge, kawamuna. Now, in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one or the other. Now, they will dispute the idea of kawam, or being kawam or kawamuna, and say, oh, maybe it doesn't mean what you say it means. Doesn't mean what you say it means. Look at the etymology of the word and look at everywhere it's used in the Quran. You'll be quite surprised at the usages in the Quran. It gets used to mean something that straightens or leads or stands above. Right? Mustaqim, straight. It's the same root, by the way. Or qaim, leader. Yeah? So qawamuna comes from leader or one that straightens or stands above. And yet the feminists don't like that. They don't like that, not at all, not one bit, because for them, good and bad is about equal power relations, not about, you could say, ultimately equal in responsibility, responsibility and power balance out. So if you're given something extra, you have more responsibility. That's how we see the principle work amongst Islam. So last but not least, and it's the final slide, Neo-Marxists, the problem with them is they believe in what I call the doctrine of suspicion. They're suspicious of everything. And we will see a bit more tomorrow about that. But basically, if you are an organization, you're a masjid, you're an MSA, you're a university, you're a workplace, you're a company, you're a government. If you try to make an accommodation to say, you know what, I want to be more inclusive to women, to disabled people, whatever. And you have these programs, you try to get more people of the diverse backgrounds employed. Whatever you do, the Neo-Marxist has, and I have quotations for this, which I'll be showing you tomorrow. They have interpretations of this. The interpretation is this, is that, well, the power structure hasn't really changed. So you doing this is not that you desire to make changes and make more inclusion. No. You're doing this to hide the fact that you have privilege and power. You're giving token gestures, but really you're hiding it, and that makes you worse. That makes you worse than an organization that didn't even bother in the first place. So every good gesture you do of inclusion is really a gesture to maintain the power structure as is. And you think, are you sure they say this? wait for tomorrow. I don't want to give everything away today because I've pretty much described Neo-Marxism in tota and how it relates to modern day feminism. But when you see how it relates to race, there are some, I will show you quotations of how people discuss that in terms of race. But what does the Quran say? Beware of suspicion. Suspicion is the most worst of false tales, and do not look for the faults of others' faults, and do not spy, and do not be jealous of one another. Suspicion. If I say, I see brother, let's say brother Tariq, he's given a gift to somebody in the MSA, and I might say, okay, he's being generous. He looks like he's being generous. Or I could say he's trying to bribe the MSA. You understand? Glass half full, half empty, or even glass with something else in it. The neo-Marxist is propelled to find, do you know the old Islamic, well, it's not an Islamic school of thought, but just in Muslim history, there was a group called the Batiniya, okay? They believed that the Quran had hidden meanings, and they were all about finding the hidden meanings in the Quran. Really wacky, twisted out, because your imagination can run wild when you assume the intention behind actions. Okay, Neo-Marxists are all about assuming the intentions behind actions, and they all assume the worst possible intention. Why? Because the power structure is not changing. So if you're doing something, but the power structure ultimately is not changing, then you must be secretly reinforcing that power structure, no matter how good, nice you are. Never tell Neo-Marxists that you're not misogynist or racist or ableist heteronormative or not heteronormative or whatever. They'll say that you saying this is denying the fact, is actually covering up the fact that you are, right? Because clearly you are part of a power structure that maintains it. You are a cog in the machine. So you denying it is covering it up. It's worse. What you have to say is, I have racism inside myself, I have ableism inside myself, I have heteronormativity inside myself, and all I can do is to be silent and give my platform to amplify someone else. That's all you can do. You have to say, you have to say, yes, I am racist. You have to say, yes, I have sinned, and I have original sin, and only through the blood of Jesus Christ can I be saved by amplifying His message. Oh, anyway, sorry, what was I doing? We'll go with that. But anyway, parallels. Anyway, so brothers and sisters, and that was a long one, but I've basically took you through most of 20th century developments in Marxism, feminism. I pretty much gave away a lot for how tomorrow's lecture will be about race, but there will be some interesting specific applications of it in critical race theory. So all I can say is Barakallahu feekum, and as I always say to everybody at the end of my lectures, I want you to approach this lecture with trying to refute everything I said, disagree with everything I said, well, with reason, or like give some argument or something, but I want you to give your contentions. I will be giving power privileges, okay, to those, or privilege to those who have contentions. So, Barakallahu feekum for listening, and I'll await your contentions and questions and so on and so forth. Who would like to go first? And don't let it be about Zionism again. Let it for another lecture in the future, or even a debate. Okay, so sister on the left, well, not left wing.
You covered a lot of ground, and principally I agree with the positions that you were taking, particularly of course with and Ahadi. But I'm quite uncomfortable with your characterization of Gramsci and Horkheimer, particularly the early scholars from critical theory, Frankfurt School. I think what you have mostly said about modern critical theory certainly makes sense, and there is a lot of misappropriation of Gramsci and of Horkheimer and Adorno in the modern in today's in contemporary neo-Marxist theory or contemporary critical theory. But I think Gramsci was a very, very sophisticated thinker. I've engaged a lot with his work, and I've read his prison notebooks. And I think suggesting that he was basically, he or even Horkheimer were talking about intentions is a bit simplistic, because they were not concerned with what the intentions of a power elite are. They realize that there is a power elite which is quite diffused and which changes its own character, and there are people who would take the top tier at one point and then they will be replaced by another group of industrialists. They were much more concerned about structures. So Gramsci was concerned more about structures, structures of material structures, ideological structures, discursive structures. He was talking about, certainly he was concerned about cultural hegemony, but his discussion on how cultural hegemony is produced is very nuanced, in the sense that he talks about so many disjointed elements that come together, not necessarily by design or intention, but how the events sort of bring them together. So I think I see a lot of value in drawing from, even when we think about building sort of discourses. I think like there is a space for some kind of, maybe a bit of unholy alliance against capitalism, which is the predominant force today when it comes to sort of engaging with ideas of people like Gramsci or Horkheimer, who has a very solid critique of enlightenment that is an ideology that is dominating today's world, and most of us disagree with it, and most of us think that it has done so much damage to our world and to Muslim societies in particular. So that's one point. The other is there was, when you were emphasizing on equality, there was a point where you said that there isn't really, it's not a conversation about oppression and oppressed, and I'm pretty sure that you were talking about that in a very specific context and not generally. But I thought that it's important to sort of qualify. Quran emphasizes a lot on oppression and oppressed. Of course, that's the definition of oppressor and oppressed, and that equation is very different from how the critical or neo-Marxists would describe that. But fighting against oppression has been mandated upon Muslims, and that's that I thought was important. And just one more point. So when we talk about language, for example, certainly there is a capacity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us with through Prophet Adam, and there is sort of a divine understanding of language. But again, I think when we talk about the evolution of language, for example, the other day, the first day we were talking about categories of thought, and you mentioned like how some of these categories have never been part of our disciplines or our way of thinking. For example, homosexual or not, like characterizing people based on their gender identity and creating those terminologies itself is very problematic. It doesn't really, like, it has never been part of our tradition and culture, and it's very difficult to sort of then engage in conversations which are just not necessarily our tradition. And there sort of language does become a social construct. So there is a part of language which is evolving and which is socially constructed. So can we completely dismiss that, or should we even completely dismiss that? So I wasn't sure about that. Yeah, and if there is like at the end more opportunity, I have, like I talked about a couple of other things. But
okay, thank you, sister. So I'll try and summarize in reverse order. Just have to remind me. So I'll start with the last bit you said first, and we'll continue going in reverse order. Is there an aspect of language which is socially constructed? Well, words are neologisms are constructed all the time to describe different aspects of reality, of different things which have been noticed, usually categories. So language creates categories. You think via categories. But the issue is that you can categorize people by, there are people who like Marmite, as I mentioned before. It's a spread, a toast spread. And people who don't like Marmite, I've created two categories there simply by saying a binary as Derrida, false binary. No, but by simply saying there's those who like, those who don't, literally the negation. So am I now socially constructing it? Well, no, because the reality exists. There are people that are exclusively attracted to the same sex, and those who are not exclusively attracted to the same sex. Those are realities. The construction is not that reality has been constructed, but rather that you give moral weight, or you give a consideration as a united group or some kind of shared consciousness in some way, by saying that there is a community of those who are the same-sex community, the same-sex attraction community, and the different sexual attraction community, and those in between, the bisexual community. Those are things which are invented, but based upon realities. It's rather giving them political significance is the falsehood there, rather because you're giving it moral weight to make these categorizations. But these categorizations exist in reality, though. They are like, that people, you can group everyone. Was it a bag of well, I'm going to like a maths set theory, a bag of green bags, a bag of red bags, a bags of all possible numbers, a bags of even numbers, bags of odd numbers, and so on and so forth. You can create categories and sets, basically set theory. It's not constructed, it's just how you can slice reality any which way you'd like into categories. That's not construction, it's just where do you want to make the slice, basically. So I would disagree. Language is built on trying to describe aspects of reality, and otherwise it would be meaningless, quite literally. And reality, in a way, reality is the same. We have the same reality now. We live in the universe as much as Adam alayhi salam lived in the same universe, and he was told the first names of things. And if you realize, all language is built up, even new words are built up of constructions of previous words. We have lots of Greek neologisms that we use to construct things now, like sociology, for example, the ology, which is the account of society, an account of, or history, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so no, I would disagree. It's not socially constructed, but our choices as to what classifications we want to prioritize, or what we want to give moral weight or consideration for the political system, that is the falsehood that humans invent. It's not that these things don't exist, it's how humans slice these things and what they do with the slices. Right. Now, how to go back? Did I miscategorize Gramsci and Horkheimer? I don't think so. But you expressed something, and I respect. I said I very much appreciate, actually, that you challenged me on this matter, and I think it highlights something. And that's what my point was, that you seem like a very sincere sister, and I want to tell people that if people that read these thinkers they don't have horns growing out of their head and evil, what have you. There could be genuine people who are trying to get a good insight into capitalism itself, to understand capitalism, and they see these people who have analyzed capitalism and say, these guys can give us some insight into capitalism, because isn't capitalism the shared enemy, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Not always the case. If you read this, what is Horkheimer criticizing? What is wrong with capitalism would be the case. What is it wrong with it, right? They say it oppresses. Okay, give me a definition of oppression. Well, to do that, I have to give you a definition of human nature that's being oppressed. But human nature according to which definition? Whose definition? Well, for him, it's individuality. He says that capitalism denies true individuality because he wants individuality. But that's not the measure of how we determine good and bad, is it? So that's why I give a big red flag to any Muslim. I say, don't read these thinkers from the basis that you think that they're going to give you objective knowledge. All they can teach you is they can teach you about their moral lens and how they use their moral lens to understand the world. They can't give you objective knowledge of the world. Okay? Like, if you say, but I want to know how capitalism works, the booms and busts and the cycles, go to any economist. You don't need to read Horkheimer. Just go, any economist will tell you about inflation, will tell you about interest rates, will tell you about stocks and shares and so on and so forth. This is not a mystery, That's just reporting of the objective attributes of capitalism and its tendencies. Any economist will tell you, they don't need to be Marxist. It could be a liberal economist will tell you the same thing, basically. Right? And tomorrow we'll learn that you don't need to go to a critical race theorist to tell you about racism. You get to any social statistician who studies statistics, who does surveys, who gathers data, they are the ones where you get your knowledge about racism from. Its prevalence. The inequality, the disparities, how the police treat black people in America compared to how they treat white people in America. How do you know there's a disparity? Because of statistics. Not because a critical race theory just said, well, based on my subjective experience of my lived experience. No, your lived experience means nothing. It's anecdotal. We want stats. Stats tell us stuff. Yeah? That's why critical race theory can give you no knowledge about racism. That's why you can talk about it without being a black or non-white adjacent or what have you, because it doesn't give you any knowledge. Right? And we'll discuss that tomorrow. It doesn't give you information, it just gives attempts to give an explanation from a particular lens of reality. But what you want to start with is, okay, put that aside. What does reality say itself? Let me just look at reality and see the stats and see this. Those are the objective things, as best as we can anyway, do. So Horkheimer has a subjective idea about what the problem of capitalism is. That's why he can't give us any information. I don't think I've mischaracterized Gramsci. I mean, do mention anything I said that you think I was wrong about, but he clearly goes beyond Karl Marx's economic determinism. Karl Marx was very deterministic, although some people say his early writings weren't so much, but we have to go by his final publications, right? He believed that the economic system determined, without any free will involved, what people are going to think and how they're going to be the way they are, okay? And Gramsci was attempting to show that that's not the case. Ideology has a life of its own. Yes, it might be through subconscious ideas of the ruling class, but the class as a group maintains a cultural hegemony or the implementation of its ideology over the masses, and they do so whether consciously or unconsciously, but the ideology lives an independent life to economy after it's been created. It's like a baby is born by the parents, right? It's born from parents. The baby doesn't still depend on the parents to exist, because it could be raised by anybody afterwards. But once it's born, you can't say, well, the baby emerges from the parents, therefore it always needs the parents there to exist. No, once it's born, it now has a life of its own. Yeah, that was Gramsci's kind of addition to the Marxist thought. And he tried to argue that he wasn't contradicting Karl Marx's economic determinism. He was giving a new spin on it. So I don't think I've misrepresented him, but if I have, let's discuss quotations, let's discuss texts and so on, so I'm more than happy to. Anyway, but thank you. We'll come back to you because I just want to give everyone else a chance. And then, okay, so brother with the checkered shirt on the back there. Any comebacks from the Zionism? I'm joking. Wait a second. Your shirt is white and blue, like the Israeli flag. Wow, sorry.
Yeah, I feel like my intersection was the idea that you prescribe one understanding or a certain interpretation of Quranic text or how Muslims should act, whereas such interpretations have mostly solidified maybe 250, 300 years after the Prophet has died. And they haven't really changed much since then, right? These interpretations are man-made, subjective, and by definition are flawed. And I want to make it clear to the people here that as individuals, we are not bound to these interpretations or methodologies for us to be called Muslims. Centralizing religion into the hands of a few quote-unquote authorities is problematic when the Quran does not even prescribe that, or prescribe Abu Hanifa or Hanbali or any method, right? Moreover, claiming that one objective literal interpretation without any room for human critical thought or situational analysis can easily become problematic. The Quran itself adapts to different environments during the time it was still being revealed. So revelations in Mecca, for instance, are different in nature than the revelations in Medina, by virtue of how the situations in both geographical locations are different. So claiming that whatever methods we have today or whatever interpretations we have today are pretty much set in stone, and they should dictate how we should view entirely, like how we should relate to today's social context isn't convincing for me.
Okay, where were you on Monday? I discussed liberal reinterpretations of Islam, making these exact same I specified all the types of arguments made by a position which I think is similar to what your position that you're making. So let's discuss. Is it a valid interpretation that there are two gods? Is it a valid interpretation of the Quran that there are two gods? Because maybe, you know, the pagan Arabs, because they misunderstood polytheism and they weren't ready to learn true polytheism. So they were given a simple lesson: just believe in one God for the time being, and when you're ready, you can come to the true truth that there are two gods, a good God and a bad God, like let's say Iblis versus God, but a Manichaean worldview. Why is that not a valid interpretation of the Quran? Or do you think that could be a valid interpretation of the Quran?
I think we have to first determine what constitutes a valid interpretation.
Okay.
I guess.
Do you think the Quran can import anything objectively? Do you think God can say anything to us objectively?
The Quranic text itself is objective, however, our interpretation of it is subjective.
So, okay, well, the objective, it certainly exists outside of our minds, yes. But do you think that the Quran, or do you think God knows how to impart objective knowledge into our heads via His revelation?
As someone who believes God is all-powerful, then yes, God can definitely implant objective knowledge into our heads.
And via revealed text?
Well, He can, but it's another question of whether or not that's the case.
No, but can He though? You said He can do anything, so can He?
Yeah, well, God can do a lot.
So then do you think that God didn't do that with the Quran, that the Quran is deficient, that it can't impart at least very basic of things objectively into the heads of human beings?
Well, the lack of objectivity does not necessarily mean that something is deficient. I wouldn't argue that. I would say that, in fact, it means...
So it's not objective, and the Quran isn't objective?
No, our interpretations of it aren't objective. However, the fact that we interpret it in a subjective matter does not necessarily mean that it's deficient. In fact, I say that it's a benefit because it's more flexible.
Okay, well, let's go into more specifics. What do you think the word interpretation means?
Interpretation is how I, as a human, it's a subjective experience of me as a human when accessing information.
Well, what do you mean by subjective?
Well, it means that from one human to another, it's different. It's influenced by external factors or by genetics or just by how my brain thinks, and is not necessarily impartial.
It's not impartial. Okay. How did the creator of the universe? How did He impart revelation to us? In what medium? What form?
Through a book.
What, actual physical book?
Well, through words.
Through words. Okay. So did the creator of the universe teach the Prophet Muhammad in the Arabic language then, and then gave him specific Arabic words? Did the Prophet Muhammad learn Arabic from the angel Gabriel, basically, the Arabic language?
Prophet Muhammad knew Arabic growing up.
Or you knew Arabic growing up, and where was Arabic stored as before the Quran came?
It's a language spoken in a certain society.
It's a language spoken in a certain society. Okay, we're getting there. All right, good. And so everyone in that society is speaking the same language, ostensibly in one area anyway, one locality, yes?
Yeah, but it changes over time from place to place.
Well, it changes over time, of course, but in that one situation time, in history, the words have particular meanings, do they not? Yeah. So if I used the word hello to you, but really I intended it to mean like get out of the class, but I used it, but you understood hello as in a greeting, but I wanted to give it the meaning that get out of the class, but I just say hello. Do you think it would be a bit silly if we couldn't agree on what the meaning of words are that are common that have reached an ijma in society, which is what language is at any particular moment? It's a cultural ijma, a agreement as to what the words mean, right? Okay, so then are you saying that in a society where everyone has an ijma on the meaning of words, that God could objectively at least impart basic information clearly via a language that everyone agrees on the meaning of those words?
Well, let me clarify. I said that our interpretation is not free of any biases. I didn't say that the word itself or the revelation itself is subjective.
Okay, so I suppose by bias you mean that we have desires or we have assumptions, which I totally agree. The Quran says to eliminate assumptions, right? Don't rely on dhann. It's condemned in the Quran, not rely on dhann. Don't go by your desires. The Quran seems to think that humans can read stuff without assumptions, and it's possible humans can read stuff without assumptions and can read stuff without desires and read it, i.e. objectively. Do you think the author of the Quran is wrong for thinking that of humans?
I have to see where it actually says that, and if it
Well, the word dhann in the Quran is many places. Dhann does not avail against the truth is one particular verse. Dhann does not avail against the truth, speculation or assumption, dhann or like doubt. It has a few meanings. So
I'd ask, how would you explain how we have 4 different mazhabs, and why are we bound to those mazhabs when the 4 of them contradict each other on some...
So I think you've made an assumption, right? You're a bias. Because there is a possibility of multiple interpretations in some things, you assume there's a possibility that everything is interpretable in the Quran in multiple ways that are mutually contradictory. But there has to be parts of the Quran that are quite clear, otherwise the Quran couldn't do its job. It'd be a bit of a bad book if every part of the Quran just was undecidable. You could think that there are 2 gods, and you could interpret there are 2 gods. And as I said, with a human being, with their creative imagination and crazy desires, you'll get a human being that can say anything about any text, right? All they have to do is just change the meaning of the words. That's all they do. They assume the words have a meaning other than the ijma of the society it comes from. So, now we've established this, if the Quran talks about there's only one God, I don't think you can have any interpretations there are others, such that people could say that if you believe in 2 gods, you're no longer a Muslim, right? And if the verses of the Quran which talks about qawamuna, that men are qawamuna over women, if you say, oh, that's subject to interpretation, but yet every single Islamic sect, group, faction, what have you, and there were ones that split up very early, everyone has ijma on this. There is a consensus on this. These are the people who preserve the Arabic language, who understand the Arabic words, what they mean, and they all have absolute consensus over a word. But you, 1400 years later, seem to know more about the Arabic language, not you in particular, but know more about the Arabic language than people in its time living amongst that consensus of people when everyone knew what the words meant. So for you to prove your thesis, which is a speculation by the way, and let's just put that out there, that these things were brought into Islam 200 years later, you'd have to find even just one piece of evidence that the Prophet Muhammad was actually living under some liberal utopia, and with coincidentally exactly the same laws that 21st century the West has in liberal societies, to prove anything of your thesis, to prove there was I call it the corruption thesis, that he was originally a misunderstood liberal and everyone around him was just didn't understand. It's like, what language is he speaking? I don't know. I speak Russian, but you know, So there's that major problem with your speculation, and again I'll specify it is speculation, because you need to find at least one evidence of any kind of liberal understanding, liberal law, liberal cultural aspect that was done by the Arabs, and you won't find. Now you argue, oh, but Mecca and Medina, you know, there wasn't like isn't that based on time and place and geography? There was a time where the Prophet Muhammad didn't have a state, right, and we didn't see any political laws. But when he had a state, there were political laws. Wow, doesn't this show that there's moral relativism? No, it shows that if you don't have a state, you don't need political laws. When you do have a state, you kind of need political laws. It kind of helps, you know. So you really need to revise, and I think you need to be honest with the thinkers that you've read. I'm going to guess, like people like Khalid Abu Fadl, I'm going to take a wild guess, right? And many others like, he's not the only guy, who make all these speculations interpreting a liberal Islam that historically has never existed in any, even a single school of thought from the earliest factions that split off, including the Khawarij, who split off pretty early on, and they were all about opposing everybody else. Yeah? So, that's a problem that you have to solve. Until then, I will just follow the ijma, an ijma that has been continuous since the earliest sources of Islam that we have, which is that of a patriarchal family structure, of laws that punish zina, it's in the Quran, of the sin of Qawm, which is again pretty clear cut. You need to give me evidence to say that actually I've misunderstood this. But if you do, you kind of run the risk of actually demonstrating that the author of the Quran is a bad communicator, because if you're saying that he doesn't intend the most obvious and clearest meanings in the book, right? And there are verses in the Quran which are muhkam, and other books are mutashabihat, right? These are clearly muhkam, they're very clear verses. If he doesn't mean this, then the author of the Quran is a poor communicator. But everyone understands John Locke's arguments and John Locke's political philosophy. It's very quite clear cut, very rare, very minor disagreements on minor things. All right? Whereas you're saying there are legitimate disagreements on the most major and most obvious things. So you need to to self-reflect. You have a comeback. So yeah, go ahead.
I'd say that I'm not necessarily speculating that the Prophet was living in a liberal communist utopia. What I'm trying to say is that we actually don't have access to know exactly what it was. And I guess my point would be that...
So you're saying that we don't have access to know?
Well, basically with what we have, we cannot really determine that this is actually what was meant, because that's all us.
I would disagree. Let me show you why I disagree, right? I'll do it visually, okay? So people say that, the existence of the Shia schools of thought and the Khawarij, or now today the Ibadis, they would think Khawarij is a pejorative term. We're not violent. Ironically, they're the most pro-Muslim unification, chilled out people in the Muslim world. The least takfiriest people are the descendants of the Khawarij. I find it ironic. But anyway, Oman is a quite chill place, actually. Anyway, so we have the onset of Islam, here. Okay, I'll just represent it as a sphere for some reason, and we have continuation of tradition. Yeah, we have tradition. Where you say continuation of it, which I'm writing like a doctor. But you had splinter groups very early on coming either side of that. They splintered and became isolated. So then they obviously gave us, they actually, it's a great mercy in a way, because they gave us a snapshot of the early times where they separated from the Muslims, or at least from the main Jama'ah anyway, because they're all about their differences, right? They guard their differences, because that's what made them separate in the first place. So they give us a really great snapshot into the past. And what you find is that if these all agree on, let's say, that men are the guardians of the family and the responsible of the family, if they all agree on all these points on hudud, punishments, which they generally do, there is ijma across all these factions. We have mutawatir, multiple chain narrations going back to the Prophet Muhammad via all these divergent schools of thought, diverging at the most earliest junctures, that all reaffirm the same understanding. So I would say this approach is absolute certainty. Unless the only criteria for absolute certainty is getting into a time machine and traveling back. But that's a form of epistemology that would render your knowledge mostly nihilistic, because then you couldn't know anything unless you personally observed it, and then maybe you could be imagining things, maybe you could be brain in the vat, and so on and so forth. So basically, that's what we have backing up what you call mainstream Islam across all the schools of thought. In fact, when I call to any aspects about Islam, although I am from the Ahl Sunnah schools of thought, I didn't need to say it, but because I wore like a black toppy, everyone thought, "Are you Shia?" I say, well, look, it doesn't matter, but because I discussed the general ijma, right? My da'wah has only been calling to Muslims to the collective agreement of all schools of thought across the entire history of the Muslims. I don't call to anywhere where there's difference of opinion. It's beyond my authority to make you all Hanafis or Hanbalis or Atharis or Asharis or whatever. Right? It's not beyond it's above my pay grade. Scholars have been debating those things for years. I'm not a scholar to give you an authority, and even many scholars couldn't resolve these disputes amongst themselves, although they might claim certainty.
Can I add something? But you correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
So you said that we were bound to the four madhabs. That's not true, because Ibn Hanbal himself said, "Don't take from me, but take from where I have taken," i.e. the Quran and Sunnah. But of course, that doesn't mean anyone who thinks he can interpret goes around and interprets. It's not down to the scholars or a group of people who are controlling us from behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's about tradition, it's about ahadith, it's about historical record. In essence, it's historical record. If all the historical records agree quite consistently, putting a quite consistent picture that the Muslims practice Islam and answer the Quran in its most obvious meaning, right? Then unless you have some you found a time capsule that says Abu Bakr was here, and you open it up and it's like he tells you, oh, here's what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ really said. Unless you can bring that, and you can carbon date it, and we can tell it was written by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Unless you bring that, you have literally no evidence to say that it was anything else. Which is my point, right? And if that's the case, and also we also have to consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the universe, must have intended that to be the case, that there is no other evidence of anything else other than the agreement that all Muslims have going back 1400 years, then that must clearly be quite clear that this is what the Prophet Muhammad intended, and what the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended when revealing to the Prophet Muhammad. So if you wish to have a different understanding of Islam, i.e. you wish Islam said something different to what the ijma of all Muslims for 1400 years have said, then you need to ask yourself, just to be sincere with yourself, that do you think that your desires that you have now are not subjective by the society that you were raised up in, that's given you ideas about what is good and bad, that has no authority? And do you think that has made you see Islam as deficient? And do you think maybe that you should try better to understand the wisdom behind Islam, these are laws? Maybe they give you a much better solution to the solutions that the West tells you. Does that not cross your mind, do you think?
Yeah, but I guess I want to add on to that a bit.
Sure.
I'd say that, sure, if we look at things historically, we might come to an agreement, okay, that maybe things where certain core tenets of Islam are the way they are, and that's how it is. But when it comes to certain details, it becomes more gray, and you can't really verify that and it's not true that...
So what do you mean by certain details? So we mean by certain details, like for example, were thieves punished by hand amputation? We have no other evidence to say anything else except yes. Were males expected to be the breadwinners of the family? There is no other evidence to say anything else but yes, right?
Cases that,
like
society that show that certain gender structures were not the case throughout the entire 1400 years of Islamic history.
So are you saying that human corruptions after the time of the Prophet Muhammad should have any moral weight to Muslims?
Well, I'm saying that
because there's a lot of corruptions that Muslims have done ever since after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Should our religion be held hostage by hypocrites and sinners?
Even during the time of Muhammad,
yeah.
Khadija was also she was the money maker when they were married. She was a businesswoman. So certain gender.
But am I advocating in Islam that denies women the opportunity or the right to make money if they so choose, so to speak? Is this what classical Islam says? It denies women. Does any of the classical schools of thought say that women can't make their own money?
No, it's not.
So then what's the issue? Then what's your issue then?
Because it says by virtue of what?
Yeah, as a general command, which means that in marriage, so in law, that would mean that the husband is expected to, but the wife can waiver that right. Okay, because just because you have a right in law doesn't mean that you need to always press your rights. You can waiver a right and say, I won't hold you to this right I have. Okay, you need to dispute that the law itself didn't exist. Okay, because every other school of thought that branched off through multiple chains of narration, meaning independent chains that couldn't have all corroborated with each other, all reaffirm, which reaches what we call mutawata, which reaches the point of absolute certainty in Islam, such that denial of that is, will render someone outside the fold because you're denying what is absolutely certain. Unless you say, the only way to go around that is to say that there is no certainty at all in anything that it comes from Islam, but then that would mean itself that Islam itself wouldn't be certain, and you couldn't say, even that it was from the creator of the universe itself. And you see where the logic then leads to, which is nihilism, or a type of epistemological nihilism. That would be the natural consequence if you say, well, I need to be there, I need to make sure that I wasn't in a brain in the vat, and I need to make sure that I had I was omniscient, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're in a situation where we actually can't be there.
But we don't need to be there if we have independent chains of narration.
Room of interpretation to the four madhabs. So why do we stop there? And it's very arbitrary that we decide that there are four and not say five. Because if we're going to...
Well, Ibn Hazm would clearly say there's more than four. Ibn Hazm of the Afadi school of thought.
Like four, I guess...
Okay, you know, ignore the idea of the four madhabs, just for the point being. Maybe that's like disturbing you. I'm talking about the clear teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of which there is ijma on. Okay, the hudud punishments, all schools of thought agree on them. The punishment for irtidad, I'm actually surprised everyone agrees on it. Every single school in history, every scholar in the history of the Muslims who ever could access historical information or historical record from multiple geographical locations where the Sahabas went to transmit this, all agree. Testimony, multiple agreement across geographically isolated chains of historical transmission denote certainty, because how could they have all known what's in each other's minds unless the Sahabas or the tabi'in were psychic and they can somehow, one of them could make a lying thought and it would then spread amongst all of them across great distances and what have you. But even that would be impossible, because then if one person would disagree with everybody else's minds. But anyway, I digress. You need to be honest to yourself about the epistemology that you're trying to adopt. Like, if you want to say that the Prophet Muhammad, when he mentioned about the rights of the wife and the man and vice versa, that he didn't mean what is in clear-cut multiple narrations across multiple schools of thought, which have preserved independent copies of narration. They're in their own books, their own transmissions, right? It's not just Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, that's the only ones, and the Sahih Sitta. The Ibadis have their books, the Shias have their books, and they all corroborate the same thing, despite their early factionism. And the Ibadis, the Khawarij, they went out to the desert to separate from the Muslims. So they went right to the edges to fight their insurgency against the caliphate system. And of course, unlike the Christians, the Islamic civilization became a state at the very beginning of its inception. After the Prophet Muhammad did hijrah, that was a state. He revealed laws that became laws of the state. Let me put it this way. We know more about the laws of Napoleon Bonaparte for certain than we know about his private life. Although you could say there's diaries and things like that. But we know more about his laws. We know more about the laws of Caesar than his private life. Why? Because the laws are made public. Right? But the private life, do we know? I don't know, we hearsay, what have you. The Prophet Muhammad revealed a way of life implemented by a state system in a whole society. Right? From the very beginning. That was a preservation mechanism, because they need to preserve the laws, because they need to rule by laws every single day. Okay? So we have overwhelming historical evidence to the point of certainty that the mainstream understanding of Islam, and by mainstream I mean all schools of thought beyond the four, magical four, as you put it. No, you don't put it, but as you seem to discuss, these four, I want to break these four. It's like, okay, well, relax. You can be, Ibn Hazm's waiting for you if you like. They have common agreement. So we're not here to talk about madhabs. I'm here to talk about ijma, and that's the ijma. The question is, would you truly accept the word of God if the word of God said exactly the ideas that all the ijma of Muslims that have preserved for 1400 years have said it is the case, based on clear understanding of the Arabic language from the Quran, with clear verses in the Quran about hudud punishments, punishment for zina, punishment, all this stuff. It's quite clear. Okay, things that liberals can't accept. They wouldn't accept punishment for zina, right? I used that against a liberal. They couldn't get around the verse of the Quran. He was like, didn't want to talk about it. So you need to ask yourself, you need to be honest with yourself about this, seriously. Because what you're saying, and I'm not saying you say this, but I'm just saying that the road you're going down, the logical conclusion is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a good communicator, and that how do you know anything for certain? And then the next logical step is that Islam is uncertain, or that the author of the Quran is deficient, because John Locke is quite clear on these most basic creeds, and even his more elaborate creeds. Everyone's quite clear on this. Is John Locke a better communicator than the creator of the universe? You see? So ask yourself that question. Something for you to ask yourself as a you could say homework then, if we're giving out homeworks, inshallah. Okay, I want to let someone else speak. Anyone on this side? Comments, questions, or contentions?
I want to correct myself first.
Okay, well, find him a mirror. You can correct yourself. I'm joking. I want to, hey you, I'm wrong. No, sorry. Okay, go ahead if you want to correct, if you make a public correction.
Yes, not imitating, but the rest is the same meaning, but instead of not imitating, not taking. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Correction noted. All right then. And tomorrow you must do public Toba, or no, on Jummah. And okay, anyone on this side?
Can I just make a suggestion for the category?
Okay, go ahead.
There are two books by Jonathan Brown. He is a convert. One is called Muhammad Practicing the Medieval in Modern World, and the other is called Refuting Muhammad, the challenge and choices of interpreting the prophet strategy. I think you'll find them really useful. He has done a lot of work on the Zionism method, and you get to see like why these things are established.
Okay, thanks, sister. All right, anyone that has comments or contentions, disagreements, or questions, if you'd like? No one from this side? No? Okay, so you went there, so I'll go for the middle row, brother in the back. You? Yeah.
First on a lighter note, you wanted to rile up the audience, I think, and I think you've been able to do that, so that's great. I've got a couple of things that I find a bit challenging to understand.
Sure.
The way you spoke about power structures.
Yes.
You seem to have brushed power structures in the sense that the way I understand is that power structures do not exist and they do not have a negative impact. But that was my understanding.
From what I'm saying, that power structures don't exist.
That's the impression that I got.
No, of course they exist. Of course there's hierarchies and things, yeah.
Okay. The other thing, you spoke about microaggressions. And again, you seem to sort of brush microaggression with
Yep.
as if they do not exist. And so I've got problems with that because microaggressions do exist, at least that's what I think. But the way, I don't know, the way you try to explain that, it was like they actually do not exist. And so
then I'll define what I meant. So, are there comments that are derogatory that assume something derogatory about yourself by someone? Yes, that exists. Obviously, that exists. Yeah. It's like, oh hi brother, oh you've got clean clothes today. It's like, oh, okay, that's not a compliment, right? Like, that means you got dirty clothes or something like this. You say. Or you say, oh, you're from Turkey. No, I don't want a kebab, brother. It's okay. It's like, well, not every Turkey eats kebabs. Not every, whatever. Okay, fine. But although maybe people, they might be proud of it. Who knows? The question is, do you intend an insult? Right? Actions are by intentions. The Western concept of microaggression is different. The Neo-Marxist one is different to that. It's not about what you intended. It's about what the person interprets you say, and they also assume that you're saying it, whether consciously or subconsciously, to reinforce the power relations in society. That's what they call microaggression. It's very specific. The Quran does not give the epistemology to the person who is a privileged epistemology, to the one who is in the minority or is the oppressed or whatever necessarily, because there's a verse of the Quran that says those who have a disease in their heart, they imagine every cry is against them, right? These are people who think that anyone who says something or make even a slight comment is criticizing them, is attacking them. But it's because they have a disease in their heart. It's not because it's true. That means you can't trust human interpretations of being insulted. You can't trust it. What you can trust is what was said. You look at what was factually said if you were there, for example, and if there was any clear intention or conveyed by it. Okay. I want to cite a scholar who did come to UBC, a good friend of mine as well, Sheikh Jafar. He's an amazing scholar, mashallah, very warm-hearted brother, and he basically, in a lecture 2.5 years ago, I think, or something like this. I think it was this lecture called Elephant in the Room. Or, Elephant in the Masjid, that was it. So he was asked about microaggressions, and he gave the Islamic answer to it, which is that it's by the intention, right? Like if someone didn't intend it, it's not an issue. But if someone is racist or is angry, has kibr, right? They think they're superior to others. It will manifest clearly in an intended argument, an intended claim or intended insult or what have you. A passive-aggressive insult, or a what they called compuscults or whatever. Someone's giving a compliment, they're insulting at the same time. Whatever, I forgot the name of it now. So it would clearly manifest in their intention, right? It would manifest in their intentions, but you can't say, subconsciously you're basically, Islam wouldn't consider it to be haram, because actions are by intention. But if you have kibr, then that is the sin already. The sin is that you have kibr, and you choose to manifest it by speaking down to people, and insulting them and thinking they're less than you, right? But the microaggression doesn't care about intention. It just says that if it is judged by the perception of the recipient of the comment, right? And it says a negative comment, or judged to be of a negative stereotype. That's it, stereotype. Okay, that's also a problem. The Quran says that Allah made us a nation of tribes that we may recognize each other. Well, recognize what? That you have certain cultures, that you come from cultures that have certain ijma. An ijma of urf, sorry to non-Arabic speaker, someone that they have a consensus in customs and tastes and things like that. They develop some rough consensus. Does it mean now that every Persian likes chola kebab could be there? I like it, I love it. Does it mean now that everyone from Pakistan has pakore or loves pakore? No. Right? If you say, you're from Pakistan, there's a great pakore shop. How dare you assume I like pakore just because I'm from Pakistan? I'm insulted by this. It's like, well, I don't mean it insultingly, but it's just statistically speaking, there's a high likelihood, because you're Pakistani, that you might like pakore because it's a thing in Pakistan, right? It's not an insult. I like pakore, but I'm just, I'm making an assumption, yes, but I'm not doing it insultingly, but that would be microaggression, depending on how they want to take it. You're judging me according to a stereotype, okay? It's up to them to determine whether it's negative or not, okay? Right, but as I said, but if someone demonstrates kibr, arrogance, that they feel they're better than you, that's forbidden in Islam. That's why, as I said before in the previous sessions, Muslims shouldn't use terms like anti-racism, anti-misogyny, or microaggressions, Western terms. Use Islamic terms they have very good definitions, clear definitions. Yeah, asabiyya is haram, kibr is haram, and they're general principles. Don't think you're better than other people. Don't be arrogant. Don't think that you have certainty when you don't, and don't make factions other than the ummah. And even then, you stand for justice even against yourself. Yeah? Those are simple principles. Right? But if you take the word, but I want to use this Western term misogyny and what's racism and ableism, and I want to use this term microaggressions, you surrender yourself to Western definitions of those terms. They're not Quranic definitions, they're not Hadith definitions, they're Western definitions. And then you've let in Western concepts of values and good and bad into your deen by taking, Islam isn't anti-racism. Okay, great. So I'll take anti-racism and then those who defined it will tell you what it means, and they're not going to take from the Quran and Sunnah, right? Instead say, I don't want anti-racism policies, I want anti-kibr and anti-asabiyya policies in the masjid, in my company, in the government, in the MSA, whatever. That would be the Islamic approach.
Can I just follow up?
Sure.
I hear what you're saying, but I think because of the political correctness that's become pervasive in the Western world, that's from where microaggression emanates, because they do not want to make it very obvious that they are being aggressive to you. And I know this might be going to a conspiracy theory or something like that, but then it's a thing, right? Like, because of political correctness, they cannot make it obvious that, let's say, they look down upon you. I'm just giving an example. if I'm a colored person, you're a white person, let's say you're Canadian, that would be great, right? Better than being British, I guess. And you ask me where.
Well, I'm part North African, but okay, let's forget that.
You ask me where you're from, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I live in Vancouver. I say, Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
Where are you from, really?
Okay.
Well, I'm a Canadian, you know.
Yeah.
I was born in Canada.
Right.
And then the third time again, no, where exactly are you from? Now, that question, let's say you're a white person, you would not ask of another white person. And if you were to do that only with a colored person, that's microaggression because you haven't made it obvious. You have not made it obvious that you're trying to be aggressive to me. But wouldn't that be a sort of an aggression? Because you're asking that to somebody who's colored and not to a white person. So again, as I said, probably 10, 20 years ago, they would make it very obvious that, oh, you know, you're really, you know, you're a colored person. Are you from here? Now, those words are not said, right? And so it's now term, you know, the words used are different, but I mean, the intention is pretty obvious.
Okay, well, let's dive into that then. So you said that their intention is pretty obvious. Is it? Well, okay, is it? Okay, I tell you what. Whenever you meet any human being that you don't they look unfamiliar to you, like they have features that you don't fully recognize. What's the first thing when you meet any stranger? You say, "Hi, how you doing?" What's the first question you ask? Okay, what's your name? After that,
Where are you from?
Where are you from? It is an automatic behavior for human beings to identify, I want to know origins because your origins tells me something about your culture, then tells me how to relate to you, right? To recognize each other, right? It's naturally occurring. Now, as I said, the Neo-Marxists would say, no, it's designed to make you feel like the outsider, that you're a foreigner in this country and so on and so forth. But I've found, you made an assumption about people's desires. Now, there might be someone who's being racist and wants to say where you're from, what have you, but I don't know what they might achieve to say where you're really from and say, okay, well, I'm from Thailand or something. So what we established then? You're originally from Thailand, your great-grandparents were from Thailand, okay, big whoop, so what? No. Although in Canada it's quite ironic because I actually have had a few conversations with many white people on the plane generally. I'm quite the sociable guy on the plane. And I ask them all the time where they're from, and I say, "Oh, are you originally from English extraction, French extraction, Scottish or Irish?" I ask that all the time, actually, and I've seen people ask the same, or they even volunteer it. Actually, originally my great grandparents were actually from Scotland. We moved here in the 19th century or 18th century, or whatever. I'll say, "Oh, okay." That's happened all the time because Canada and America is apart from the Native Americans here and the Native Canadians, they're a nation of immigrants. They're all immigrants, or some way, shape, or form. Although you probably won't ask in Australia, you probably won't need to ask all the white people where they're from because your great-grandparents were just criminals from England, so we know that. So there's no new information there asking you where you're from. People ask where they're from to get to see culture, right? Especially if they see, for example, objectively that you have an accent not resembling let's say the normative Canadian accent currently, which will indicate that you might be more recently from elsewhere, and they just want to know your background so they can relate to you, or just know more about a new background they never encountered before. Okay. It's totally normal, but it depends how you're told to interpret those questions. And yes, it doesn't mean that everyone who's ever said that has good intentions. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that it can be interpreted in a benign way, a naturally occurring way that all humans ask, or it can be interpreted in a very negative, bad way. And Neo-Marxism is all about the latter. Always it's interpreted the bad way, always. I ask Muslims all the time where they're from. Right? Because I love the diversity of the Ummah, and I learn so much from encountering. just last year, I met a Pomac for the first time. I was like, wow, a Pomac. Those are, we were like, what's a Pomac? These are Bulgarian, indigenous Bulgarian Muslims. You didn't know they existed, did you? Right? They did. They're more indigenous than the Bulgarians. They were like Greek descendants that were living there, and they converted to Islam at some point. Anyway, it's a long story. But I knew about them because I like ethnology. But I loved it when I encountered one. Oh, excellent. Let me know more about like some, from first-hand evidence. I love this. So you can either interpret that in a good way, as in I'm just fascinated by the diversity of the Muslim Ummah and I revel in it, or I'm trying to emphasize to this Pomac that they're foreign. It was actually in Scotland at the time, even though I myself am foreign to England, or at least my parents are. So I myself am not English, So is my job there to make the Pomac feel foreign when I'm a foreigner too in the same land? And I kind of look pretty Muslim, with my topi, and so on. Now I look especially even more identifiably, say, Muslim. So I'd never really felt that the British looked at me like, oh, there goes an Englishman. They don't look at me and then they think that, right? It's beard and everything with the Mediterranean features. I'm not English, right? So my point is this, that Neo-Marxism always makes you have a negative interpretation, whereas you have to, what I'm saying is not to always have a positive interpretation, just assess it on the merits. What was the tone of voice like? What was the facial expression like? Add all that together. If they say, oh, where are you from? Then that kind of conveys, okay, he's probably not a big fan of people of my skin color then, right? Or if he's like, oh, where are you from? It's like, oh, okay, it looks more innocent, more benign. So, yeah, just don't use Neo-Marxism to interpret things, all right, is my point. Oh, you know what? There was a message I had, like a special message I wanted to add, and I completely forgot to mention it, and now most of the sisters have left because it's quite late now. But the brothers are the target audience, so it's okay. In this particular case, right, I want to be very, very extra clear about something. If sisters come to you demanding Islamic rights from the Quran and Sunnah, they're in the Quran and Sunnah, it's clear cut. They say, we want to go to mosque. And you say, oh, but it's not recommendable for you. It's recommended for you to stay at home and pray. Okay, but it also says in the Quran and Sunnah, do not prevent women from going to mosque, right? So I want to go to mosque. Don't say, are you a feminist? Don't say that, guys. Don't say that, right? A feminist is judged based on the content of what they're calling to, not because it's a woman calling to rights, okay? Yeah, it's time for you to stop watching those Andrew Tate videos. I'm joking. Well, am I? And like stop judging, because you know what it is. It demoralizes sisters who actually want to be called to the Deen and want to live by Deen, but they're humans and Muslims, and so they want Allah's rights that was given to them. Okay, and if you deny it, or because you are so ignorant about feminism that you think everything's feminism because a woman says it, or a woman calls to it, you are turning them into feminists. Because what they see is that you're just intent on denying rights, even legitimate rights. That makes it look like you are the patriarchy who hates women, are misogynists. Do you understand? And it's not men, I don't think it's done with intent. I think it's because there are brothers, and let's be honest, because many Muslims are ignorant, brothers who are just generally ignorant about Islam and feminism, and you just think, oh, well, that sounds like a feminist. Don't say that, guys. You're shooting yourselves in the foot. You're pushing sisters who want to live by the Deen towards the feminists, basically, right? So don't be idiots about this, please. We want to encourage adherence to the Deen. Yeah? So, yes, it is recommendable for sisters to pray at home, but guess what? It's also recommendable for brothers to pray sunnah prayers at home. Yeah? Are you going to go to the masjid and go, are you praying enough for the witr? Go home. Go home, brother. Just go. Right? You're not going to do that, are you? Yeah? So then, I mentioned this the other day, but I'll mention it again because we're in the right relevant, this is the relevant lecture for it, of course. As I said, there was a public da'i, I will name no names on this individual because either you know what he says or you don't, but I could do, but I'm going to just choose not to. So, in this particular case, he defended the Taliban's kind of banning women's higher education for the time being. I mentioned this before a couple of days ago, so do forgive me for repetition, but this is about feminism, so let's talk about it. And he said because it's not an Islamic obligation for women to have higher education. Higher education makes women less likely to form stable families and have lots of children, so on and so forth. That was the argument. So this is like a capitalist thing that makes women kind of not be mothers and homemakers and things like this. So he was like, yeah, so I think it's good that they banned it, and because it's not obligatory for women to go to higher education, was his argument. And I say, well, yeah, it's right, you're right, because there was no higher education at the time of Prophet Muhammad, there was no university system, that's true, but it's also not an obligation for men to go to university either, all right? With a caveat that obviously as long as society has sufficient professionals to fulfill the collective obligations of the deen required, it's not obligatory in any particular man to go to university also, which is also it's also true, but it's also not haram for a woman to go to higher education or a man to go to higher education either. So yes, the Taliban wasn't preventing an obligation by going, arguably, by going to higher education. Yes, of course. But they were prohibiting something that is permitted, and that does go against Islamic rules, right? But the real reason they're doing it is not because they think women shouldn't get educated. As we know, as I mentioned before, the days ago, in Pakistan, many there are madrasas that follow the same ideology as the Taliban that teach men and women there. No, it's because the West froze the funding kept the funding of the government of Afghanistan. They're going through famine and problems there. They need the money. The Western governments are just being nasty about giving them their money, the money they have in international banks. And so the Taliban said, well, if you guys are so crazy about women's education, all right, fine, we're going to ban it until you give us our money back. Remember, they banned it 1 month after their funds were frozen. Yeah, 1 month. To which I said 2 days ago that what they should have said, because they have really bad PR, they have bad PR with PR, right? That's an Urdu word, don't worry. Anyway, is they should have simply said to the West, we're going to freeze all funds for higher education or higher women's education and redivert those funds to feeding people who are dying of starvation or they are malnourished. There's no point in being higher educated when you're dead. They should have made that as a counter-argument. So if you want to give us our funds back, we will put that back into higher education. Until then, we need to feed people. A better argument. And I also said, if the Taliban are looking for a new diplomat, I have good rates. And you can just feed me those big Afghan naans, they're really tasty. So, yeah.
You need to see you with the turban more often then.
You need to see me with a turban more often.
I'll do it.
An Afghan one. This one is actually this one is Afghan actually. Yeah, it is an Afghan turban, I think. Okay, that brother who was defending Taliban, you're making things look really bad if you try to say yes, it's good what they did, and because education destroys families or prevents women from forming families at a younger age, which obviously leads to healthier kids, because the older you are, the older you leave it, obviously, the more risks that are that happen, the more issues that can arise with children, of course, and so on and so forth. So, okay, that's fine. Then why don't we create a society where women can have access to higher education if they wished, because it's not haram, but at the same time inculcated that men and women to be able to get married younger. Why don't we just do both? Why is it either or? Yeah? So that would be my response. So anyway, as I said, brothers and sisters, do not fall into the trap of gender sectarianism. And people like the non-Muslim Andrew Tate before he became Muslim. But not just him. I heard of MGTOWs, men going their own way, who are basically the equivalent of the feminist political lesbians. But not to be gay, but in fact just to be separatist, right? Separatist from women. The way to address feminism is not to go the other way and argue for male asabiyya. It's asabiyya. It's jahiliyyah, it's kufr. Okay? Instead, we don't try to make everything equal between these two. You know, we say, oh, okay, one of them is unequal. We need to balance it out. Well, you know, like one of them is getting too bigger, so we have to balance it out with getting with trying to fight for our side, which ironically is very neo-Marxist in a way. Instead, you say no. Forget making them equal. Have them all under this is my attempt to draw a book, but under the Quran, basically, and Sunnah. Put the Quran above us, right? Don't make it about humans, who is above who in humans. Forget humans. Humans have no authority. The Quran and Sunnah has authority. Let's make the law above us and make that the absolute thing, yeah? So reject male asabiya or Meninism or red pill rubbish, and also reject all the Western feminisms, and just stick to the Deen of Islam. Have it in good authority. The author of the Deen of Islam knows what he's talking about when it comes to human beings. Okay, that was my message. You know, like make that into a TikTok or something. Right? So I wanted to make that clear, because you're pushing women unnecessarily to feminism because of your ignorance and fear over how to deal with it. You don't know how to deal with it. Well, deal with it from Quran and Sunnah confidently and engage it also. But you don't need to, like as I said, Andrew Tate's his advice is more like women are arrogant, and so you have to treat them like this to get the respect you want. How about don't go with an arrogant woman in the first place, or give dawah and tell her that there's something higher than us, than us. It's a creative universe. And then marry someone who is just as non-arrogant as yourself, and knows their place in the universe. Yeah, which we all have that place, and we're all under the same creator. So that would be my suggestion. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Comments, contentions, criticisms? Oh, you. Okay.
I had a question. So I remember the concept of gender fluidity, where the individual's gender changes over different times. So I was just thinking, just in reference to standpoint epistemology, where you can't say something because you are a woman.
Yeah.
Can an individual say that no, I'm actually gender fluid? When I'm talking to a feminist, I identify as a woman, and when I'm done the conversation, I go back to being a man. This is a contradiction.
Okay, the brother says, can you use gender fluidity to confuse feminists and others by simply saying that when you're telling you off, you say for not accepting what they say, you say no, I identify as a woman now, and then when they're done, you say you identify as a man, right? I suppose you could. The funny thing is, okay, they would say you're not being sincere because you don't truly believe that, but
who are they to decide though?
Yeah, but technically speaking, yeah, who are they to decide that too? Yeah, you're right. But that's why neo-Marxists and also then postmodernist influenced individuals will fight each other, and we so mutually confused and confusing. So you're right. That is one of the things. Anyone on this side? Sister, right on the side there. Yeah.
This might be a silly question.
Sure.
But I have a brother who says if you partake in that or acknowledge that, it's bid'ah and haram, and you shouldn't be doing that. And then part two, he actually also mentions things you were mentioning before about women seeking higher education and how it shouldn't be done. In his point of view, it shouldn't be done because there's a lot of free mixing.
Okay, so the sister asks, she comes from a background that celebrates International Women's Day, and her brother says that's bid'ah, and he also says that women shouldn't go to higher education because there's a lot of free mixing. Right? Did I represent it correctly? Okay. So I think the first point is there's a general rule, Muslims only have 2 Eids, which is what the hadith says, that Muslim has replaced the celebrations of Jahiliyyah with 2 Eids, 2 public celebrations that we have. Now, you could argue that because there were times when Muslims rejoiced after battles and war and fighting, so you could have temporary celebrations to celebrate, be thankful over a victory. And of course, you can celebrate things that happen in your family, like a birth of a child, or a son or daughter, or what have you. You can celebrate those things, and have a party, or just celebrate having guests and things like that. But not socially instituted, permanent Eids. is the case, I suppose, is what he's trying to say. I'm assuming, or maybe I'm making a better case than he does, or maybe he just thought that specifically Women's Day, or as in for women, is a bid'ah. But no, I would say it's the issue of having another Eid other than the two Eids. So that would be the position of the schools of thought, generally speaking, with one exception, of course, the debate on the Mawlid of the Prophet Muhammad, the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad. Muslims today want to celebrate, many Muslims want to celebrate this, and it wasn't celebrated at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, but does it mean that it's haram to celebrate it? Well, the issue is, I'm not going to get into it, because it's outside of my remit. If there's ikhtilaf, not my job to get involved in it. I can only call you to the ijma. So, oh, you said a second point, about going to university because there's free mixing. Well, the marketplace in the times of the Prophet Muhammad had free mixing, and the Sahabas even complained that there might have been a bit too much free mixing even in their times happening in the marketplaces. But it doesn't necessarily mean that women are prohibited from going to the marketplaces because there is free mixing. So I'm not going to give a fiqhi opinion, of course, about university specifically, but I'll just give you the general principle. It seems that there might be men and women mixing in a locality because they're all in the same area, is not a basis to prohibit them from going to those areas, but it could be justified that you might need to regulate those areas. With the Sahabas, maybe did try to regulate men and women like walking down streets, and like not to bump into each other, to kind of clear areas and things. So like one channel for men, one channel for women, so to speak, that kind of stuff. So that would be the response. That just because there is free mixing in an area, that could happen, as in men and women in a same local geographical location, is not sufficient to mandate a ban from what we know from the equivalent of marketplaces in the time of Prophet Muhammad or afterwards, and so on. But as to is that, can I give a fiqh opinion on the issue of university specifically, or Canadian ones, or in the 20th century Canada? My head's still back across the Atlantic. I can't say, because that requires a faqih, and I'm not a mufti, and I can't give you an opinion on that. So I can only tell you the classical situation. But because a mufti might say, well, yes, in general, but there's a specific reality about Canadian universities, or American universities, or Western universities that are a little bit different than the marketplace, that might mandate that, right? I don't know, because I'm not a mufti, and that's why I can't speak on that. So all I say is, free mixing, as in women and men being in a locale, is not by itself a principle for banning it, because that situation happened in the past. But as to the very specific arenas that exist today, you need to consult a scholar. Okay. Okay, you brother.
When we look at Neo-Marxism and all these other isms, and we discuss them in isolation, they tend to make clear sense, and arguments, I can put arguments into certain brackets. But in the real world, for example, in the Canadian society or in the Western society, do you find that individuals, when projecting their arguments, mix from a bunch of these ideologies which in originality contradict each other, but somehow they have been grouped into individuals, and the lines between the lines between these ideologies are not very clear anymore. So, for example, you would find someone who identifies as a liberal making these neo-Marxist arguments, but fully identifying as a liberal. It seems this division of left wing, right wing is not very clear.
You make a good point.
Or maybe it's just that I'm not understanding.
No. You make a good point. So, brother says, why do you find people who are liberal might using neo-Marxist arguments? Because just as you have Muslims that are using neo-Marxist arguments, and so a liberal and a Marxist are defined, and a socialist, as I mentioned before in the previous sections, are defined by the political project they want to see happen. Yeah. So how the economy is going to run, how's the state level of power and general rights of the people. But these also contain analytical tools for judging what is oppression and what does it look like, what does individuality look like, and there's no fixed understanding of it in any particular school of thought. well, I mean, there's general mainstream ideas, but people might, like a liberal could say that a microaggression might be a form of harassment, because social liberals are against harassment. They might concede because they say, well, if it causes someone offense based on race, let's say, then they could see that it could be a form of harassment. They're open to that, yeah, because social liberals believe that you have to have social opportunity, and you should have a social safe space, I suppose would be the way of putting it. That's why social liberals have hate speech laws, whereas classical liberals would never implement hate speech laws. They say it's against freedom of speech. You know, they say, like, as long as no one's physically harming you, so just like toughen up, you know. So, yeah, you're right, there is a lot of confusion, but like postmodernists or post-Marxists, sometimes called, or post-structuralists, if you want to be more precise, they're just an analytical tool and a tool of refutation, because they don't believe in any meta-narratives or ideologies or deans. Yeah, they think they're all undecidable. So they don't really have one they're advancing. But in a way they kind of are a little bit, because they're trying to say, they would argue that then, that all individuals should live free from meta-narratives, free to make your own narrative would be their argument, I suppose, you know. But they couldn't talk about economics, and they couldn't talk about political system. They don't talk about that stuff. Yeah, so postmodernists, they are a reaction to disillusioned neo-Marxists. They are disillusioned Marxists and neo-Marxists who apostated from them and said, you know what, forget capitalism, forget Marxism, you're all crazy. We should just be about the individual human being making their own narrative, not being under the Marxist narrative, neo-Marxist narrative, or the capitalist narrative, or what have you. They're against all narratives. That includes Islam too, by the way, and Christianity and so on and so forth. So, you have a follow-up, yeah?
No, once you're done, are you done with your thoughts?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So, this is not something that I've fully thought about, but this is just an impulsive thought right now.
Sure.
I find the way we are learning about these isms right now, they put us on a track which makes it harder to argue with individuals in the modern real-day context, because we're learning about these. It's good, I'm appreciating these thoughts, but we're learning about these ideologies in isolation, or as they were originally understood. But what we have today is a complete mixture, concoction of different isms and individuals. And
I know where you're going with this, and could I give you an answer, presuming where you're going to go with this, which is, can we, if only there was some kind of guidance that looked at how people instantiated these ideologies, how they implemented and used them, the tactics they use, and pointing out where these come from, these things that people do amongst youth, woke, whatever. If only we had a document that said, here are these tactics that they do, and here's where it comes from, and here's how they're wrong. That's a great point, brother. That's an excellent point. If only we had like case studies, and then we could then, you know, trace, you know, where these ideologies came from. Is an excellent idea, brother. I think inspired.
And I know where you're going with this.
I don't know. All I'm saying is that, just, you know, Friday is Yom Jummah. It's a blessed day, and I would like to see you guys in this lecture on a Friday. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. Right, this for the grand finale. Anyone else have any comments? Yeah, brother, there.
I've seen in recent times that there's almost been this abolishment of definitions, or definitions as classifications. We've almost shifted to this society where we're only interested in identification or self-identification. So you'll see today, unfortunately, or whatever it might be, and I want to get your opinion on this. When someone says, okay, I'm a Muslim, but I identify as well with certain aspects of this. I'm not following the general definition, or the ijma', if you will, of what this definition means, or this ism means, but I identify still as this, but I'm a Muslim. And you know, you can put any ism in front of Muslim.
Okay, so someone identifies as something, they say, I don't necessarily believe what this label originally said, I just want like the label. Okay, then tell them, why don't you call yourself a Satanist? If any Muslim says, oh no, I just want to, I want to adopt this label. I don't believe what this label meant from the Western perspective. I just like the label. I say, okay, then call yourself a Satanist. And they say, why? Well, no, I'm going to call myself a Satanist. Well, why not? Because, you know, Satanists, they worship the devil. I say, no, just, you can reinterpret it. Just say, I just believe the devil exists. Satan exists. So you believe that this exists is a Satanist. The original meaning is adherent of someone that believes in. Yeah. Okay. No, but people misunderstand that. They'll think that I believe in Satan. I say, well, exactly. So why are you calling yourself secularist, nationalist, feminist, socialist, liberalist, conservativist, whatever you want to call it, right? Conservative, I suppose. Because you will equally be misunderstood. Yeah, as Muslims, we're not even meant to be drinking from wine cups, lest people think we're drinking wine, right? We're not meant. We have to not generate shubahat. So why are we calling ourselves stupid labels that have a clear-cut, or at least a well-known meaning that's at odds with Islam, saying, "Oh, but I choose to identify it in my own personal way." Yeah, I tell you what. You say, you're an idiot. No, not someone that has weak intellect. I choose to define it as someone who is clever. So I'm going to call you an idiot, right? But you know my meaning, right? They're not going to like it, is it? They say, oh no, but it might have had a meaning once that way, a bad meaning, but I mean it as a clever person. Yeah, and say no, but that's clearly everyone knows that. Well, exactly, doesn't it? Everyone knows that. So why are you doing the same thing? Yeah. Was there one on this side? No? Okay, on that side then. Goodbye.
Thank you for the awareness.
For what?
Thank you for the awareness survey.
Awareness. Okay, yeah. Oh, the Kufr Awareness Week. Yes. Yeah.
I have like a dilemma always. So for some unfortunate reasons, and it's surprisingly not very uncommon, that we might share some goals with these ideologies. So, is it better to, like, for the sake of obtaining this goal, just to share with them, like, to join forces temporarily, just to get what we need? And like, I will give you like some examples from, like, I'm originally from Egypt.
Sure.
There were few organizations funded by World Bank that were supportive for women's rights, and they were actual, like, they have the right, like some women were denied their basic needs and their basic rights, and something should have been done. Like, I was against, like, that was like maybe 15 years ago. I was against it, like I was against to join forces with those liberal movements, because till the moment, like, yes, those women got the rights, but till the moment, people remember that this was because of the liberal movement, not because of that, like Azhar or the Islamists or the Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Well,
okay, so do we join forces with liberals or others who are doing good works? And of course, is there a problem? Because people might think that, well, these guys initiated it, and so they are doing things and changing things for the better. Yeah, it's because of them. Okay, well, that's a very, very interesting point, very good point. I mean, generally the Quran says cooperate in the good and do not cooperate in sin and transgression. However, the problem in the Muslim world, the problem with the Muslim civilization currently is we don't initiate anything. We just react, right? Like a stone, a dead stone, right? Dead stone don't initiate stuff, does it? It gets hit by water, it rolls, it, gets smashed apart, it breaks. It doesn't do anything, right? If there was no external pressures in the Muslim world, no pressures of resources or any of that kind of stuff, the Muslim world just wouldn't change at all. They'd be too busy waiting for the Mahdi or making any other excuse to procrastinate, basically, right? That's the level of us as a civilization. There's a reason for that, which I can get into, but after 1400 years, it was inevitable. We reach a cultural and economic plateau, and then we would start to decline as we forget the ideological resources that made us dynamic, as in not reacting, but initiating new changes and seeing ahead in the future, planning ahead. And by planning ahead, I don't mean like making some silly city that's shaped like a line, because you're going to run out of oil in a few decades. That should have been done decades ago. right? You should have maybe a sovereign wealth fund where you spend all that oil money investing it around the world, like the Scandinavian countries do, and then make loads of money, and you don't even need to, loads of money that keeps on going with a constantly renewing investment that you've put based on initially oil money you found. Yeah, whereas obviously others, they just spend it on the nice palaces and pliable scholars. Anyway, the Muslims should be leading in all these things ourselves, right? Islam has guidance. Islam can change the world. So why are you letting the world change you? That's what happens. If you don't change the world changes you. That's guaranteed. And then people will think it's hikmah, it's wisdom. Oh, because the world is changing, and obviously because we have no power, because we don't do anything. We have to adapt by the least of two evils, right? And when you choose the lesser of two evils, you normalize the evil. I once noted that once you choose the lesser of two evils, then that becomes your new standard. Okay, so you can either fall down like all the way down here, or you can fall down all the way down here. You say, I'll just pick this one. But as you fall down here, you're now closer to the lower one, and eventually you get more offers, more choices of lesser two evils, and slowly you reach there anyway. Yeah, you're just slowing down your descent, I suppose, and it's called wisdom, basically. So isn't it funny that for all this talk of choosing lesser of two evils, how comes every single choice fostered upon us, not ones that we generate ourselves, is evil, between two evils, always between two evils? How is that guidance for humanity? That the only thing that we think Islam tells us to do is to constantly choose between a never-ending series of evil choices. That doesn't sound like guidance to me. Okay, what did the Sahabas do? They didn't choose between lesser two evils. They made the choices. They made the two choices. They created the new situations. They opened new possibilities, new opportunities. Right? They planned ahead. They didn't just say, "Okay, let's sit down, wait, see what happens. Oh, it's not going our way. Oh well, let's just choose the lesser of two evils then." Right? They didn't do that, but we do it now because Islam is shackled in the Muslim world. It's viewed as a crazy force that has to be controlled by these dictators imposed after colonialism. Right? Their job is to prevent Islam becoming political again. Every time that their regime is threatened, like Gaddafi said it, like Assad, and like Mubarak, what did they say? If we go, the Islamists will get in. Right? They were saying it to the West. Right? Don't fire us, or don't leave us to hanging, in some cases literally, because like we were the ones, our job was the ones to keep suppressing the Islam down in the Muslim world, right? And because the current usul on the Muslim world is avoid fitna at all costs, even if it actually leads to greater fitna, because and so on. But and fitna being defined as anything unpleasant, basically. Oh, really? If the early Muslims in Mecca, including the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, had the usul of avoid causing fitna, he wouldn't have given dawah then, because the Quraysh said, look at this person, look at all this trouble he's making, cursing our gods. Like they wouldn't have cared if he just worshipped one God and didn't say anything, because the Quraysh don't care if you just want to worship. There already were people that were Hanif, they worshipped one God. They didn't care. They knew about Jews and Christians. They don't care. But they told the Prophet Muhammad, do not don't care about whatever you want to believe or pray to. Just stop insulting our gods. Stop attacking our gods, our religion, our way of life, our deen. Stop doing it. Yeah. You could have, if you took any maybe let's say not deep thinking scholar we have today, unfortunately, that tells us watch out for fitna. If you were to take that guy, put him back in time to advise the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he'd probably say, look, if they let you pray to one God, then don't cause fitna by insult. Why are you causing fitna by criticizing them? Yeah, why? Yeah, that's what they say, wasn't it? Because they say that now, right? They say it now. So basically, I believe in following the Prophet Muhammad and the way of the Sahabas, the ijma of the Sahabas. And these were very different Muslims, obviously, we know that. But don't just look at their personal piety, how they prayed and so on and so forth. Look at how they used and implemented Islam. Not just what they implemented, how they implemented Islam, how they made plans, how they thought about tactics. Khalid bin Walid didn't just think, well, we are the army of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's going to give us victory, we're just going to hit the enemy straight ahead because the angel's going to come, they're going to help us. We don't need strategy or tactics because we have Allah on our side. No, he knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us on this earth with limitations, with the need, with the aql. He expects us to use it. So if we don't, so he made plans, he made tactics and strategies, ingenious ones, fooling and deceiving the enemy, genius ones, subhanAllah, what he did. But because he knew, yes, Allah determines victory of things, yes, of course. But we're here to worshipping via maximum effort, and maximum effort includes aql as well as. So if he didn't make those ingenious plans, and he just said, "Oh, I'm going to walk up to the enemy and fight them," he knew he was being deficient in his obligation, because Allah wants us to do our absolute best, which means we use everything in our control, every tactic, stratagem, planning ahead, foreplanning, contingency planning, all this stuff, and then once we've done all this, we have tied our camel, yeah, and then Allah can give us that victory, right? But if we just think that we deserve victory because we're on the right side and we just do minimum efforts, which is what Muslims generally do today, then of course Allah's going to not give us victory because we're not worshipping Him properly. You understand? He made us in a universe that has rules and limitations, and so why aren't you attempting to, we say, game the system, game this universe for the haqq? Yeah? You just think that, oh, I'm on the haqq, so Allah's going to give victory to it automatically. No, that's not necessarily the case. Yeah? You have to think, you have to use hikmah, you have to use wisdom, right? You have a follow-up, yes?
Yeah, like I understand, I mostly agree with what you said, but this is about the collective responsibility. What can I do in this condition if the alternative is basically doing nothing?
Yeah. Well, as I said, because this will require a lecture in and of itself, but just two simple principles. Study everything, including...
Sorry to add one thing, because I believe that as Muslims, we are utilitarian, but the only difference that our utility function is derived from Quran and Sunnah. Some utility, but we're not making it.
Utilitarian, no, but we became utilitarian. We weren't initially utilitarian, no. Because early Muslims talked about using plans that are most effective, make a plan that's most effective, right? But then over time, over many centuries, it became about minimizing losses and minimizing fitnas, but accepting a degree of fitna because they didn't make any proactive changes, so then the world suddenly just started to give them tons of fitna, and they just had to choose what's the lesser of the lesser, and then things got worse gradually, more and more, until you see later scholars saying things that earlier scholars wouldn't say. So earlier scholars would say, yeah, speak the haqq and do inkar of the leader, speak and count the ruler, and later scholars saying, hey, he's probably going to kill you, so no point. Right? It's like, it's not what the Sahabas would have done. Yeah, the Sahabas would have been shaheed for it, and they would have done it collectively, and they would have done it they'd all come out there and be brazen about it and be brave about it, right? So we're not utilitarian, no. And I'll give you a great example of this. Okay, Imam Ghazali, he refuted this idea brilliantly. He said, imagine there's Muslims, a bunch of people on a boat. Okay, and a storm happens and the boat's heavy and they throw out all the cargo of stuff, but there's still too many people on board. Okay, and there's a possibility that if you throw people out, the majority will be saved. Just a few people, the majority will be saved. He says it's haram to throw them out because a number of reasons. You're killing them. Okay, you can't murder, even to save your life. You have no guarantee of victory anyway, of success in that anyway. Okay. So, because you can't see the future, you're not al-Khidr. Al-Khidr can be utilitarian, and only then he's given special permission by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do what he did. Yeah, some people say he's actually an angel, and hence but there's ikhtilaf, but anyway, it's not an issue. Yeah, we're not utilitarian. We follow principles, even if the principles, they might seem to make things worse at the beginning, but they actually create a much better situation afterwards. Okay, the West. And as I said, I'm not just anti-West, I hate everything about the West, because even the Sahabas praised the Romans. They said the Romans are good at controlling. They have five good attributes about themselves, including they limit their tyrants. Yeah? And I would say that in the West, like let's say if Trudeau or the Canadian government was to, let's say, ban the Canadians' right to free speech, or like to criticize them, let's say, and the Canadians would go out into the streets, and even if the military was so loyal to Trudeau they'd do anything he says, and they start shooting the people, they'd still come, right? And they would still keep coming, even if they lose loads of themselves, even if the society there's explosions and the cities collapse and what have you. They do it because they prefer to keep that principle than live in a society without that principle. And there might be destruction initially, but then there's a much stronger society afterwards. And I'll give you a particular example: the American Civil War and the English Civil War. Okay, destruction, untold destruction. 600,000 Americans died which is, well, before. I remember I cited it once when the Syrian Revolution hadn't even reached that, and the population of Syria and 19th century America was similar at that time, and the Americans didn't care, right? The English fought a war against tyrannical king. It caused untold destruction, really bad, worse than even Syria today, worse, much worse back then. And they didn't care because they were fighting for justice in their mind, and they didn't want to live under a oppressive regime. And it caused a lot of damage, oh yes, a lot of damage. But afterwards they made a monarchy that could never do that ever again, ever. They'd say fair trade. That's a fair trade, see? But so who judges how much the future about fitna and so on and so forth? You know, suddenly Muslims will think they're prophets because they can judge the future. Everyone's al-Khidr now, because we can all say, oh, this is going to cause too much fitna and there's never been any benefit from. Like, you don't know, okay? You have no idea. So you follow the principles. Yeah, it doesn't mean be stupid and just go like, let's say, I'm going to use President Mubarak now, because obviously you might be worried about using President Sisi, although I've criticized him in public. Anyway, you say like President Mubarak, he'll cause, like if I go out and just say he's an idiot, I'll get arrested and tortured. And yeah, of course, that's a bit stupid, yeah? But if I work behind the scenes and get like 1,000 of us out, to say that collectively all together, he can't can't arrest all of us at the same time and torture that many people. It's too many people to do, although he arguably could at one point. But anyway, yeah, so like you need to plan for victory, right? Rather than as Sun Tzu says, a Chinese philosopher and military strategist, he said, seek victory before seeking battle, right? So make all the right plans for victory, and then you press the battle. Don't just, I'll fight the battle first and see if I can get the victory in the battle. No, you wait, you bide your time, even if it takes weeks, if it takes 1 month, 2 months, or 7 months, you bide your time, you build up that victory, so to speak. You build up to get the right conditions, get everything right, and then you press. So these are things that we lost. We lost from our understanding about how to implement the Deen of Islam. The West, for all the kufr ideas they believe in, they have kufr ideas, but they have hikmah in how to implement them. Okay? The ideas are kufr, injustice. Right, from what Allah has given us what we deserve, but they know how to implement. They plan ahead, they make contingency plans. I mean, any of you works in the company, and all the kind of bureaucracy you have to fill in about safety reports and risk assessments and all this jazz, right? Because they plan ahead. They plan structures and they plan metastructures, and they do all this stuff trying to get ahead in hikmah and wisdom, right? Muslims don't do that at all whatsoever, and we have the haqq, we have the truth. You see, so it's not about what we have, it's about how we use it. And currently, Muslims need to know about what Islam says. We need to also study everything else, the al-waqiyah, the rest of reality itself. Yeah, as I said, the more you know about the world, the more you know about history, science, physics, engineering, what have you, the more the Quran opens up to you, the more you, oh wait a second, you now see the verses in a completely different light almost. I mean, they're not saying radically different things, they're saying deeper things. Yeah, I've learned more about the Quran through learning about the rest of Allah's creation than I would have if I just, from 8 years old, if I was just to memorize the Quran and read. An 8-year-old memorize the Quran is great, but it doesn't truly understand all of the depths and layers in it, and you need to have greater knowledge of the world to do that. You understand? So Muslims need to know more, need to learn about Islam, need to know about the world, and then they need to spread that knowledge to other Muslims and encourage them to be proactive, not reactive. Right? Once they do that, then we will revive the civilization very quickly, very quickly. 5-10 years will be very advanced. You see? So.
Just have a comment, if you may allow.
Sure.
Like what I meant by utilitarian, meaning that we have some values. These values are ordered in a priority list.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, like in Ta'un, like when they had, like an epidemic in the city. Like,
Yeah.
Like. At that time, they were not allowed to play together.
Yes.
Because of the greater good. So there is a value that is more important than another value temporarily. This is what I mean by utilitarian. Like we're not just going to go blindly and say that, okay, we should pray together regardless of what.
To use that example, so when there's a plague and you're not allowed to pray together in collective Jama'at, that's a temporary measure for a limited time of period, but that doesn't undermine the principle, right? But when you say, for example, that okay, so we live under a secular system, let's work with secular groups using secular values, and we will repeat these values only for good causes so that we can get in their good graces. You end up normalizing those values. It looks to everybody that you yourselves follow these values as well, and you're calling to them. Your children will see that, and will think that because you'd only ever respect something that is greater than yourself, right? So if you respect secular values, you must think that they are better, they're the truth, or they're justice, right? That would be you're making a permanent bad decision. Whereas to say we're gonna stop praying in congregation because of plague, you're not normalizing a wrong or injustice. You're simply just temporarily suspending an obligation because of a pressing circumstance. But Revelation gives us exceptions though. The guidance of Islam gives us exceptions. You can eat pork if you're starving to death on a desert island and there's only pigs there for some reason. You can eat just enough to survive, right? You wouldn't say, oh, but this is compromising. Well, it's not, because Allah gives us that exception to it, right? But if you live on a desert island and you initially have to eat pork, but there's the possibility that you can grow wheat and you start to grow lots of wheat, and so okay, great. Now I have enough wheat now. Right, pigs, come in, multiply. I can have even more pork now. Great, right? You're normalizing the pork eating now. You've made it into, now you have barbecues and you have suppers and you have what have you. That's the end of the session now. That's it. Right, so on that note about pigs, we're in the lecture. So anyway, barakallahu feekum, everyone. Thank you so much. And I'll see you tomorrow for a spicy one. I thought today was going to be, okay, it was all right. It was a bit more contention. I liked it. But hopefully tomorrow will be even more spicy because we're talking about race. And I am a white adjacent speaker. What shall we do? Okay, barakallahu feekum.